Hi everyone, we hope you're doing well. We're hanging in there though honestly, we haven't been getting much sleep lately. Today, we want to answer a question we get a lot: how do we publish our audiobooks? First, we post most audiobooks on Patreon as paid content. They stay paid for a few months. After that, they become free to listen to on Patreon forever. A few weeks later, we post them on other places like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, X. Lately, things have been a bit slow in terms of new members. So we'd love your help. Please share our site with your friends or in places like Facebook groups, Twitter, X, Discord, Reddit, or novel forums. Even one share can really help us grow. Thanks so much for your support. Such a massive disturbance was no less alarming than the explosion of a tailed beast bomb from years ago. The Anbu ninjas gasped as they looked at the enormous crater. What? Who could have done this? Could it be? Has the Nine Tails broken free from its seal? In their minds, only a tailed beast could cause such catastrophic destruction. Even the third Hokage wouldn't be capable of creating such devastation. Is it possible we've been invaded by an external enemy? But that theory was quickly dismissed. There's been no movement in the barrier. No matter how powerful a ninja might be, they couldn't bypass the barrier without setting it off. It must be someone within the village, and it's probably the Nine Tails. Maybe the Nine Tails Jinchuriki has lost control. In an instant, the Anbu narrowed their focus to Naruto. After all, within Hidden Leaf Village, only he, or rather, the Nine Tails inside him, could produce destruction of this magnitude. Let's report this to Lord Hokage immediately. The Anbu ninjas vanished from the edge of the crater in an instant. By now, it was already late at night. On the rooftops of the village, countless ninjas could be seen leaping across. The commotion Yoru caused was simply too enormous, comparable to the chaos of the Nine Tails rampage years ago. Meanwhile, on the other side, after taking Yoru home, Kakashi headed straight for the Hokage's office. As a Hidden Leaf Village elite jonin, if he didn't show up, he'd be the first one suspected. On his way to the Hokage's office, Kakashi's expression was grim. What exactly is that power inside Yoru? It's too terrifying, even more so than the Nine Tails within Naruto. Kakashi was deeply worried about Yoru. Yoru still hadn't regained consciousness, and Kakashi was even more concerned about the nature of the power within him. It didn't look like the power of a tailed beast, but the golden arcs of lightning Yoru released seemed almost alive. The sheer destructive force was astonishing. Yoru clearly didn't have that much chakra, yet he unleashed an amount that defied reason. Kakashi was well aware that the power Yoru had unleashed just now could not have been matched by any jutsu other than a tailed beast bomb. That was a force capable of altering the terrain itself. Kakashi didn't yet know about the might of Madara Uchiha and Senju Hashirama. The power of these two had already surpassed what most ninjas could imagine today. Even Kakashi wasn't fully aware of just how terrifying Madara and Hashirama were. Of course, even if those two were present and witnessed the power Yoru had just unleashed, they would have been utterly shocked. After all, Yoru was only 12 years old. Moreover, the energy Yoru had unleashed was highly concentrated natural energy. That's right, the destructive force just now was the result of pure natural energy. The devastation was so immense because natural energy, when not transformed into sage chakra, is incredibly volatile and uncontrollable. But what made Yoru's feat extraordinary was that the natural energy he released was not only highly concentrated but also controlled. Had it been uncontrollable, Yoru's body would have been reduced to ashes the moment he unleashed that natural energy. The instant Yoru released the lightning, an equally powerful surge of natural energy formed a protective barrier around him. These energy barriers were not just shields, they appeared to have a consciousness of their own, intent on protecting Yoru from the ravaging lightning. Even with the natural energy's protection, Yoru still fell unconscious due to the complete depletion of his strength. In truth, Yoru's attempt had been a failure. He had failed to properly control his chakra, causing all the natural energy within his body to be drawn out. This, in turn, triggered a disturbance in the surrounding natural energy. The amount of chakra within Yoru alone could never have caused such catastrophic destruction. The root cause was the excessive output of natural energy within his body, which affected the surrounding natural energy as well. However, Kakashi didn't understand this. He assumed there was some hidden power within Yoru. What he did know was that Yoru's chakra was akin to sage chakra, much like the kind Jiraiya used in sage mode. After pondering for a moment, Kakashi said, Yoru is likely naturally gifted with sage chakra. Its power far exceeds ordinary chakra. Perhaps it's because his chakra is sage chakra that it caused such an outcome when released. Kakashi had found a plausible explanation. But what he didn't know was that even if Yoru's entire chakra reserve were sage chakra, it would still be impossible for him to unleash such a terrifying power. Not even Yoru himself, let alone Jiraiya, could achieve something like this. Soon, Kakashi arrived at the rooftop of the Hokage's building. There were already dozens of ninjas gathered there, all of them at least at the level of Special Jonin. Upon seeing Kakashi arrive, Guy walked over to him. His expression was grave, clearly worried about the immense power that had been displayed earlier. That power rivaled that of a tailed beast. "Kakashi, what do you think it was?" Guy asked as soon as he approached. Kakashi hesitated, unsure whether to report what had happened with Yorua to the third Hokage. He didn't know if the power within Yorua posed a threat to the village. But recalling the way Yorua had spoken to him earlier that evening, Kakashi decided to conceal the truth from the third Hokage. After all, even Naruto, the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, was being monitored within the village. Kakashi believed he could do the same for Yorua. Especially since Yorua was far more stable compared to Naruto. It's very likely that a powerful intruder infiltrated Hidden Leaf Village. Kakashi replied. Guy shook his head. I don't think so. There was no disturbance in the village's barrier. Besides, why would such a powerful intruder come to the village without launching an attack? Chapter 28. Kakashi glanced at Guy. Then what do you think it is? Guy's expression turned serious. I think it's the Nine Tails. At this point, Guy didn't know that Naruto was one of Kakashi's students. Kakashi remained silent. He knew it wasn't Naruto. Kakashi, I think the Nine Tails Jinchuriki went berserk. Guy said. Kakashi shook his head. I don't think that's the case. Guy looked puzzled. Who else besides the Nine Tails could cause such massive destruction? The earlier explosion had completely altered the terrain of Hidden Leaf Village's mountainside. Other than a tailed beast bomb, no one could achieve that. If Guy had known about Madara Uchiha and Senju Hashirama, he wouldn't have made that assumption. As the two continued their conversation, the third Hokage approached them. Kakashi, how is Naruto doing right now? The third Hokage also believed there was a possibility that Naruto had lost control. Such incidents were not uncommon in the 5 great shinobi nations. Jinchuriki going berserk happened often. Not every Jinchuriki could become a perfect host. Kakashi thought for a moment before replying, Lord Hokage, I don't believe it's Naruto. The third Hokage furrowed his brows. He thought Kakashi was trying to shield Naruto. However, he didn't blame Kakashi. He had always placed high hopes on Naruto. That much was clear from his decision to assign Naruto to Team 7. In the third Hokage's mind, one of the members of Kakashi's Team 7 was destined to become the next Hokage. Even though Naruto was a Jinchuriki, the third Hokage clearly valued him. In fact, when he assigned Kakashi to mentor Naruto and his team, he had already chosen the potential candidates for the next Hokage. It would most likely come down to Naruto or Sasuke. This was consistent with how the previous Hokages had been selected. The reason the third Hokage valued Sasuke, a member of the Uchiha clan, was because the Uchiha clan no longer existed. Even if Sasuke became Hokage, he wouldn't be influenced by his clan. So, while Sasuke and Naruto's statuses in Hidden Leaf Village were currently awkward, they were actually both candidates for the next Hokage in the third Hokage's eyes. Naturally, the third Hokage didn't want Naruto to do anything that might endanger the village. But the terrifying explosion in the mountains behind Hidden Leaf Village could only have been caused by a Jinchuriki. Even though he didn't want to believe it was Naruto, much of the evidence pointed toward him. The third Hokage fixed Kakashi with a serious gaze. Kakashi, I hope you understand the gravity of this matter. Kakashi shook his head. Lord Hokage, if it were Naruto, then who stopped him? In the current Hidden Leaf Village, aside from you, no one else could stop a berserk Naruto. Not to mention, the release of such a terrifying jutsu would indicate that Naruto had completely lost control. And the Nine Tails would have been on the verge of breaking free. But in reality, aside from that single explosion, everything went quiet. The third Hokage froze for a moment. Kakashi's words were indeed logical. If it truly had been Naruto, who could have stopped him? Kakashi's reasoning also provided the third Hokage with a convenient explanation. The third Hokage had no intention of allowing people to associate this incident with Naruto. Now, with this explanation, he could exonerate Naruto from any blame. I'll have the Anbu investigate this matter thoroughly. The village's security will be heightened in the meantime. The third Hokage said, agreeing with Kakashi. After Kakashi finished his analysis, the third Hokage spoke briefly. With that, he led Hidden Leaf Village's Jonin into the mountains behind the village. When they saw the massive crater, even the third Hokage couldn't help but gasp in shock. Destruction of this magnitude. Apart from a tailed beast bomb, only those two could have done this. The third Hokage murmured, his face darkening as a thought crossed his mind. He frowned. Although he had agreed with Kakashi's analysis earlier, now that he was here, he didn't sense any trace of the Nine Tails chakra. The Nine Tails, being a tailed beast, always left behind a strong residual chakra whenever it went berserk. But here, there was none. This completely confirmed Kakashi's theory. However, if it wasn't Naruto, the implications were even more frightening. It was understandable for a tailed beast to cause such devastation. But for a normal shinobi to achieve something like this, only individuals like Madara Uchiha or Senju Hashirama could do so. And monsters of that caliber, could Hidden Leaf Village even handle them? The thought weighed heavily on the third Hokage's mind, and his expression grew grim. The giant crater before them left the other Jonin who had followed him speechless. They couldn't fathom what kind of terrifying jutsu could cause such destruction. Even Guy's face was unusually serious. Even if I opened the seventh gate, I couldn't create this level of destruction. This is truly terrifying, he admitted. Kakashi looked at the crater. Even though this was his second time seeing it, he still felt a lingering unease. For Yoru to have survived such a jutsu was incredible. It was clear he possessed some hidden, extraordinary power. Though Yoru himself seemed unaware of it. If he had known, he wouldn't have unleashed it. Asuma and Kurenai also stood silently, their expressions heavy as they stared at the massive crater. The scene before them left them at a loss for words. The third Hokage shook his head. I don't know if this was caused by someone within the village or an outsider. I hope it's someone from within the village. If an outsider possesses such terrifying power, the shinobi world may be facing someone even more formidable than those two. He said gravely. While a shinobi within the village with such power could also be a threat, the third Hokage would prefer that to the alternative. At least if it were someone from the village, there might be a chance to win them over. But if it were an outsider who had inflicted such destruction on Hidden Leaf Village, it was clear they harbored no goodwill toward the village. After a while, the third Hokage turned away, his face expressionless. He addressed the Anbu members nearby. Monitor the mountains closely for any further activity. Keep tonight's events confidential. Say it was an Anbu experiment with a new jutsu to explain things. The Anbu members standing beside him nodded. The third Hokage glanced at Kakashi. Kakashi, come with me. Kakashi nodded, and the two disappeared from the mountains. Many villagers who had been anxiously awaiting news late into the night relaxed after hearing the explanation about an Anbu experiment. They had initially feared that the village had been attacked. Of course, such an excuse would work on ordinary villagers and shinobi. But it wouldn't fool Danzō. In the headquarters of Root, Danzō leaned on his cane, one eye bandaged, as he looked at a shinobi kneeling before him. Was it the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki losing control? Danzō asked in a low voice. The Root shinobi replied, there was no trace of the Nine-Tails chakra at the scene. However, the scale of destruction could only have been caused by a tail beast bomb. Danzō was surprised. Not the Nine-Tails? There was no trace of the Nine-Tails chakra at the scene. It's unlikely. Danzō stood up, his expression growing increasingly grave. If it wasn't the Nine-Tails, then who was it? And does this person pose a threat to Hidden Leaf Village? The thought unsettled him. What is Hiruzen doing? Could he be secretly developing some powerful weapon? Danzō muttered, concerned that the third Hokage might have created something that could threaten his position. Chapter 29 Danzō had always been fixated on the position of Hokage. The reason he believed he had a chance to attain it was because he controlled Hidden Leaf Village's root organization. In Hidden Leaf Village, his authority was second only to the third Hokage. If the third Hokage were developing some powerful weapon, Danzō's influence in the village would decrease significantly. Of course, Danzō's suspicions stemmed from the third Hokage's tendency to be overly cautious and indecisive in the past. In truth, given the third Hokage's prestige and strength, he could have easily eliminated Danzō if he had firmly decided to do so. Meanwhile, the third Hokage and Kakashi arrived at Naruto's home. Naruto had not been awakened by the commotion of the night and was sound asleep in his bed. Seeing Naruto in this state, the third Hokage was fully convinced that tonight's events had nothing to do with him. After quietly leaving Naruto's house, the third Hokage and Kakashi went to the back of the Hokage Rock. Standing there, overlooking the entirety of Hidden Leaf Village, the third Hokage spoke in a low tone. Kakashi, that person is connected to you, isn't he? The third Hokage's voice was calm, but Kakashi could feel the certainty in his words. Kakashi's heart skipped a beat. His moment of hesitation further confirmed the third Hokage's suspicions. Only now did the third realize that Kakashi's demeanor tonight was somewhat different from usual. He had been too composed. Under normal circumstances, an incident like this would have unsettled Kakashi. This led the third Hokage to suspect that the situation was related to Kakashi. Kakashi, it seems you don't trust me. The third said in a deep tone. Kakashi remained silent. However, considering Kakashi's former role in the Anbu, the third Hokage understood his hesitation. As a former Anbu member, Kakashi had been privy to too many secrets. The third Hokage continued, Kakashi, you should know that since I've already guessed the truth, you won't be able to hide it for long. If that person poses no threat to the village, I will protect them. I don't want to see internal strife in the village. But that doesn't mean I will compromise without limits. As long as that person doesn't threaten the village, I can ensure their safety, even if it means standing against Danzō. The third Hokage turned to Kakashi, his tone serious. Kakashi was still hesitant to disclose the truth. But realizing that the third Hokage was now focused on him, he knew it was only a matter of time before Yorua's situation was exposed. Sighing, Kakashi said, you've seen through it, after all. The third Hokage's eyes narrowed slightly. So, it is someone from our village? Kakashi raised his head and nodded. Yes. I've been concerned about his safety. He doesn't yet have the ability to protect himself. The third Hokage was stunned. You're saying that someone who unleashed such a powerful jutsu doesn't have the ability to protect themselves? The third Hokage thought he must have misheard. After all, even he couldn't perform a jutsu of that scale. Kakashi nodded earnestly. That's right. The jutsu he used earlier was actually the Chidori that I taught him. But for some reason, when he executed it, the effect was far more devastating. The third Hokage was bewildered. Are you saying that the jutsu earlier was Chidori? If Kakashi hadn't said it himself, the third Hokage would never have believed it. Although Chidori was an extremely powerful A-rank jutsu, it should never have been capable of producing such catastrophic destruction. Danzō had always been fixated on the position of Hokage. The reason he believed he had a chance to attain it was because he controlled Hidden Leaf Village's root organization. In Hidden Leaf Village, his authority was second only to the third Hokage. If the third Hokage were developing some powerful weapon, Danzō's influence in the village would decrease significantly. Of course, Danzō's suspicions stemmed from the third Hokage's tendency to be overly cautious and indecisive in the past. In truth, given the third Hokage's prestige and strength, he could have easily eliminated Danzō if he had firmly decided to do so. Meanwhile, the third Hokage and Kakashi arrived at Naruto's home. Naruto had not been awakened by the commotion of the night and was sound asleep in his bed. Seeing Naruto in this state, the third Hokage was fully convinced that tonight's events had nothing to do with him. After quietly leaving Naruto's house, the third Hokage and Kakashi went to the back of the Hokage Rock. Standing there, overlooking the entirety of Hidden Leaf Village, the third Hokage spoke in a low tone. Kakashi, that person is connected to you, isn't he? The third Hokage's voice was calm, but Kakashi could feel the certainty in his words. Kakashi's heart skipped a beat. His moment of hesitation further confirmed the third Hokage's suspicions. Only now did the third realize that Kakashi's demeanor tonight was somewhat different from usual. He had been too composed. Under normal circumstances, an incident like this would have unsettled Kakashi. This led the third Hokage to suspect that the situation was related to Kakashi. Kakashi, it seems you don't trust me. The third said in a deep tone. Kakashi remained silent. However, considering Kakashi's former role in the Anbu, the third Hokage understood his hesitation. As a former Anbu member, Kakashi had been privy to too many secrets. The third Hokage continued, Kakashi, you should know that since I've already guessed the truth, you won't be able to hide it for long. If that person poses no threat to the village, I will protect them. I don't want to see internal strife in the village. But that doesn't mean I will compromise without limits. As long as that person doesn't threaten the village, I can ensure their safety, even if it means standing against Danzō. The third Hokage turned to Kakashi, his tone serious. Kakashi was still hesitant to disclose the truth. But realizing that the third Hokage was now focused on him, he knew it was only a matter of time before Yorua's situation was exposed. Sighing, Kakashi said, you've seen through it, after all. The third Hokage's eyes narrowed slightly. So, it is someone from our village? Kakashi raised his head and nodded. Yes. I've been concerned about his safety. He doesn't yet have the ability to protect himself. The third Hokage was stunned. You're saying that someone who unleashed such a powerful jutsu doesn't have the ability to protect themselves? The third Hokage thought he must have misheard. After all, even he couldn't perform a jutsu of that scale. Kakashi nodded earnestly. That's right. The jutsu he used earlier was actually the Chidori that I taught him. But for some reason, when he executed it, the effect was far more devastating. The third Hokage was bewildered. Are you saying that the jutsu earlier was Chidori? If Kakashi hadn't said it himself, the third Hokage would never have believed it. Although Chidori was an extremely powerful A-rank jutsu, it should never have been capable of producing such catastrophic destruction. Such destructive power. At most, it could only break through a few meters of giant stone. But the jutsu earlier was capable of shattering an entire mountain. That was a jutsu of the tail beast bomb level, nothing like Chidori. Even though the third Hokage couldn't believe it, Kakashi still nodded. It was the Chidori. The third Hokage was silent for a long time, struggling to process this strange information. After a while, he spoke again. What you're saying is, you're teaching that person ninjutsu? Who exactly is it? Chidori is your unique technique. Why would you teach it to someone else? Currently, only Kakashi in Hidden Leaf Village mastered the Chidori. It was a technique Kakashi had developed himself, and he had never been forced to teach it. For Kakashi to teach that person this jutsu was a clear indication of how important that person was to him. Even more important was the fact that since Kakashi had taught him ninjutsu, that person must be very young. A genius. The word appeared in the third Hokage's mind in an instant. A person this strong, yet still so young, only a genius could possess such potential. And the fact that this person had learned Kakashi's personal technique meant they could be trusted. Although Kakashi might not fully trust the person, the third Hokage knew that Kakashi's loyalty to the village was unquestionable. The third Hokage felt a surge of excitement. Hidden Leaf Village was currently in a transitional period. If there were someone capable of succeeding him, he would have already stepped down. Originally, Kakashi had been his top candidate to become the next Hokage. That was precisely why Kakashi had been made the leader of Team 7. Naruto and Sasuke were the top candidates for the next Hokage in the third Hokage's eyes. The succession of the Hokage position had always worked this way. It was a not-so-secret secret. The higher-ups all knew about it, which was also why Danzō despised Naruto and Sasuke so much. Beyond the fact that Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails and Sasuke came from the Uchiha clan, what truly bothered Danzō was that the third Hokage viewed both as candidates for the Hokage position. Even though the third Hokage focused on training the two children, he never considered himself. Danzō naturally had an issue with Naruto and Sasuke. However, neither Kakashi, Naruto, nor Sasuke fully satisfied the third Hokage. Kakashi's strength was formidable and he could likely hold his own against a typical Kage-level shinobi. But his presence lacked the intimidation of a true Kage. Naruto and Sasuke, while promising, had their flaws. If Naruto couldn't control the Nine Tails in the future and wasn't able to become a perfect Jinchuriki, he would be forever unsuitable for the Hokage position. If Sasuke grew up and became like other members of the Uchiha clan, losing his sanity, he wouldn't be able to become Hokage either. The chances of these two outcomes were high as they grew older. The third Hokage knew how powerful the Nine Tails was and how hard it would be to control it. Sasuke's personality was also a concern. If he grew up to have a mindset similar to Madara Uchiha, he would also be unsuitable for the position of Hokage. But these two were already the most outstanding of this generation. Although Naruto had been at the bottom of his class in the academy, the third Hokage knew that only after becoming a shinobi would his true potential emerge. But if there were someone even more outstanding, the third Hokage would definitely consider them for the position. Kakashi, noticing the seriousness on the third Hokage's face, thought for a moment and said, "It's the same student." The third Hokage, who had been serious, froze for a moment. "What did you say? The same student? Which one? Yamada-shin or Hanyateiko? Could it be Hanyateiko?" The third Hokage was so certain because, although Hanyateiko wasn't from a shinobi family, her mother was a pure-blooded member of the Senju clan. It was completely normal for Hanyateiko to have inherited the Senju clan's genes. After all, just like how Naruto, the son of the civilian Minato and Kushina of the Uzumaki clan, inherited the Uzumaki clan's genes, Teiko could have inherited Senju blood. Moreover, the type of jutsu they had seen earlier required an immense amount of chakra, and the Senju clan was known for its vast chakra reserves, making it a perfect match. Chapter 30 But the third Hokage had missed mentioning Yoru. One could imagine how inconspicuous Yoru must be. Even someone like the third Hokage, who paid close attention to the younger generation, wasn't familiar with him. Kakashi shook his head. Neither. The third Hokage frowned. Not Hanyateiko? Then could it be the third child? The third Hokage couldn't even recall Yoru's name. He had to resort to calling him the third child. Kakashi nodded. "It's Yoru." "Yoru? I really don't recall this child," the third Hokage said helplessly. Kakashi wasn't surprised and gave a bitter smile. "It makes sense that you wouldn't remember, since even the classmates who've been with him for 6 years at the Ninja Academy aren't very familiar with him." The third Hokage furrowed his brow. "Came to my office with me." After saying that, the third Hokage disappeared. Kakashi followed quickly. Soon, the two appeared in the office. The third Hokage pulled out the records of this year's students. There weren't many records to go through. This batch had only 30 students, and only 12 passed the assessment to become Genin. Originally, only 9 people were supposed to pass the assessment, but Yorua's presence allowed Team 11 to pass. This meant that, in the original world, if Yorua hadn't been there, Yamada Shin and Hanya Teiko wouldn't have been able to pass and become ninjas. The reason so few students graduate from the Ninja Academy is because not all ninjas go through the academy to become ninjas. Many clan ninjas just need to pass the village's assessment to become ninjas, without spending 6 years in the academy. The third Hokage quickly found the records for Team 11. When Yorua's records appeared before him, the third Hokage thought he was seeing things. These records are so sparse and ordinary. Are you sure this is the child you're talking about? The third Hokage looked at Kakashi with suspicion. Kakashi nodded. Yes, that's him. During his 6 years at the Ninja Academy, he hid his talents. This led to no one noticing. He hid his talents? Why would such a young child have such thoughts? The third Hokage questioned. Kakashi explained, this child is quite mature for his age, and his personality. How should I put it? He's a bit lazy. The third Hokage's mind instantly flashed to Shikamaru's image. Lazy, huh? Kakashi nodded. He doesn't want to be disturbed by other students at school. He doesn't like the feeling of being the center of attention. I've tested him, and what he says is true. So has Iruka. The third Hokage, who had some doubts, now dispelled them. Another troubled child, huh? The third Hokage felt a bit of a headache. Why do talented ninjas all seem to have various quirks? Having a Minato Namikaze is truly rare. It's been so many years, and only one like him has appeared. Minato Namikaze was the most normal, talented ninja the third Hokage had ever met. Others, to varying degrees, all had some issues. Where is he now? The third Hokage asked Kakashi. Kakashi thought for a moment before replying, he's at home. After releasing that jutsu, he passed out. Oh. What happened? The third Hokage asked. The jutsu Yorua released must have been an accident, which quickly drained all his chakra. He's still unconscious now. The third Hokage looked worried. Why didn't you take him to the hospital? I checked him over. He fainted because of chakra exhaustion, but there are no injuries on his body. The third Hokage furrowed his brow. How can a 12-year-old child have such a large amount of chakra? That was exactly what the third Hokage had been wondering. Kakashi thought for a moment and said, his chakra reserves are indeed very large, but the jutsu he used tonight probably didn't rely solely on his chakra. Given his current chakra levels, though quite strong, it's still only at the level of a Jonin. Clearly, it couldn't support the jutsu he used tonight. I think there's a hidden, powerful force inside him that he doesn't even know about. Also, his chakra is different from normal chakra. It's similar to the chakra Jiraiya sensei had when he entered sage mode. The third Hokage froze for a moment. Could it be a natural sage body? The third Hokage was somewhat shocked. The third Hokage had met Senju Hashirama and had even been his student. He knew very well that Hashirama was the only one with a natural sage body. It was a physique even more terrifying than the Sharingan. If he really does have a natural sage body, then Hidden Leaf Village might have a chance to rise again. The third Hokage knew that, even among the Senju clan, only Hashirama had the natural sage body. Kakashi, however, had no idea about the natural sage body. Lord Hokage, what is a natural sage body? The third Hokage thought for a moment and explained to Kakashi what a natural sage body was. A natural sage body means someone is born with a physique like a sage. Such a ninja's chakra is usually much larger than a normal ninja's, and their vitality far exceeds that of ordinary people. Moreover, they can use sage jutsu from the start. Their body is filled with sage chakra. Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, had a natural sage body. He was known as the god of ninjas. The first Hokage's jutsu had immense destructive power, and many of his techniques could even alter the terrain. At that time, only the Uchiha clan's ninjas were capable of matching him. Their battles would always cause mountains to collapse and seas to be moved, truly terrifying. Kakashi was stunned. Are there really people like that? Kakashi had a hard time believing it. After all, he had never met anyone like that before. Wait, the jutsu Yorua released tonight had already caused effects like that. The third Hokage sighed. Of course, there are such people. Back then, these two were so powerful that they pressed all the strongest ninjas in the world down. If Hidden Leaf Village were to have another first Hokage, at least we could ensure peace for Hidden Leaf Village for decades. The third Hokage looked at Kakashi. How long have you been in contact with him? How would you rate his talent? How far do you think he can go? The third Hokage sounded somewhat hopeful. The third Hokage wasn't too worried about Yorua, because Yorua came from a commoner background and didn't have the sort of dangerous Uchiha bloodline behind him. Kakashi thought for a moment and replied, I've only been in contact with him for a few days. He hadn't learned many jutsu at the Ninja Academy before, and he was no different from other graduates. Before I taught him Chidori, he could only use the basic body substitution technique and ninja tools. Then, Iruka taught him how to walk on water and climb trees. He learned incredibly fast. He mastered both techniques after just one demonstration. Tonight was the first time I officially taught him a jutsu. If not for this unexpected incident, he would have definitely learned it. And he possesses chakra of all elements. The third Hokage froze for a moment. He has chakra of all elements? Kakashi nodded. Chapter 31. The third Hokage was a bit shocked. To possess chakra of all natures, this kind of talent is simply overwhelming. And to think he could learn a jutsu like Chidori on his first try. His learning ability is extraordinary. Not to mention his enormous chakra reserves. It seems he really might be able to catch up to the first Hokage's legacy. Although Kakashi didn't fully understand just how powerful the first Hokage had been, seeing the third Hokage hold him in such high regard made it clear, he must have been immensely strong. In fact, he might have been far stronger than the third Hokage himself. After all, the third had mentioned that the first Hokage's jutsu could reshape the very landscape, a power that, in Kakashi's mind, only tailed beasts could wield. Still, the one most shaken by all this was the third Hokage. He had high hopes for both Naruto and Sasuke. That was precisely why he had assigned Kakashi as their Jonin instructor. But now, to learn that the village might be hiding another ninja capable of reaching the heights of the first Hokage? In the third's view, perhaps the revival of the Hidden Leaf was closer than he had imagined. Maintaining a calm expression, the third Hokage watched Kakashi, who seemed a bit worried. Lord Hokage. Kakashi began, I believe we shouldn't let Yorua draw too much attention to himself until he has the ability to protect himself. Kakashi was concerned that other villages, or even people within the Leaf Village, might target Yorua. Even though the ninja world was relatively peaceful now, Kakashi, having lived through the Third Great Ninja War, knew all too well that the other villages would never allow the Leaf to nurture a ninja capable of threatening them. Not to mention, in Kakashi's mind, Yorua had the potential to one day rival the fourth Hokage. Back then, the fourth Hokage alone was enough to keep the other villages in check. If they discovered Yorua's existence, they would stop at nothing to eliminate him. This was something Kakashi couldn't bear to see happen. Moreover, there were also people within the village who might want Yorua gone. Take Danzō, for example. Kakashi was certain that Danzō would never allow someone who could potentially threaten the village, or his ambitions, to exist. To Kakashi, Danzō's true concern wasn't the village but his own desire to secure the Hokage position. The third Hokage, of course, understood this as well. He nodded. I understand your concerns. I'll leave Yorua in your care. I hope you can help him grow into a pillar that supports the Hidden Leaf. And also, investigate the power within him. Help him control it. The third Hokage didn't plan to personally mentor Yorua. If he did, it would all but confirm Yorua's uniqueness to everyone else. Hearing the third Hokage's arrangement, Kakashi felt a wave of relief. He had been worried the third might keep Yorua close, which would only put the boy in greater danger. Even if the third Hokage meant no harm, Danzō certainly wouldn't let him be. Alright. The third Hokage said. Go check on him now. I need to deal with the aftermath of this matter. After leaving the Hokage's office, Kakashi headed straight for Yorua's home. Meanwhile, the third Hokage stood by the window, gazing out at the Hidden Leaf's night sky. His thoughts wandered back 12 years. I wonder if that child will grow into another first Hokage. Or another Madara Uchiha. If he becomes like Madara Uchiha, this era doesn't have a first Hokage to balance him out. Though he had great expectations for Yorua's talent, the third Hokage also knew that if Yorua truly attained the power of Hashirama Senju, there would be no one in the Leaf Village capable of restraining him. If Yorua were to turn into someone like Madara Uchiha, the Hidden Leaf Village would face immense danger as well. This is truly a gamble. The third Hokage murmured, his expression grave. After all, he couldn't foresee what path Yorua would take in the future, whether it would lead to good or ill often depended on a single decision. Kakashi, I hope your judgment is correct. Naruto, Sasuke, will you both grow to be as strong as him someday? The third Hokage held high expectations for both Naruto and Sasuke. In the future, if Naruto fully controls the Nine Tails and becomes a perfect Jinchuriki, and Sasuke awakens the Mangekyo Sharingan, attaining that godlike power, perhaps the two of them together could balance him out. Or, if something were to go wrong with the two of them, Yorua might be the one to balance them. Though the third Hokage had initially been concerned about Yorua's future, The thought of Naruto and Sasuke eased his worries somewhat. In his eyes, both Naruto and Sasuke held tremendous potential. In the future, if Naruto and Sasuke formed a powerful duo, they might very well be able to match Yorua's strength. The third Hokage was well aware of the vast potential of the Nine Tails and the Sharingan. Meanwhile, Kakashi arrived at Yorua's home. At this moment, Yorua was still unconscious, though his vital signs were stable. Standing by the bedside and looking at the sleeping Yorua, Kakashi sighed. I've told the third Hokage about you. I hope you won't blame me when you wake up. The third already noticed. If I continued to hide it, he'd only grow more suspicious about whether you pose a threat to the leaf. Kakashi felt helpless. He had originally intended to keep Yorua's existence a secret. Who could have predicted what would happen tonight? Just thinking about the commotion Yorua had caused earlier sent chills down Kakashi's spine. Looking at Yorua's still youthful face, Kakashi muttered, I have no idea how someone your age possesses such terrifying chakra reserves. That kind of jutsu was on par with a tail beast bomb. Chidori could never cause such destruction. Though, in the end, it resembled a lightning-style jutsu like Chidori. But that level of lightning far exceeded anything found in nature. Perhaps it's the kind of power that Sage Mode is capable of harnessing. Kakashi speculated that the lightning Yorua had generated might have been due to the use of Sage Chakra. After all, Sage Chakra was inherently far more potent than regular Chakra. Kakashi remained by the bedside, watching over Yorua, whose consciousness was fully immersed in his inner mindscape. Even Yorua himself didn't fully understand what had happened earlier that night. Your chakra reserves have doubled, and your speed has increased significantly. A voice echoed within his mind. In the inner mindscape, all Yorua could hear was confirmation that both his chakra and speed had improved. No explanation was given for what had just occurred. Yorua thought for a moment. Could it be because of my chakra? Did I output too much chakra? After all, my chakra is different from ordinary chakra. It's pure natural energy. Inside my body, it's completely under my control, but once it overflows, it goes berserk. Yorua was speculating, but he had guessed correctly. The reason for the disturbance that night was entirely due to him outputting an excessive amount of chakra, which triggered a runaway reaction in the surrounding natural energy. The natural energy within Yorua's body had a self-protective mechanism. When it sensed a life-threatening danger to him, it instantly absorbed the natural energy around him to form an energy shield, protecting him from the lightning strikes. Furthermore, since the lightning had been generated by Yorua himself, it carried a trace of his consciousness. When the energy exploded, most of it didn't strike him directly. Instead, the unfortunate surroundings bore the brunt of the disaster. The overwhelming lightning energy was almost entirely discharged into the ground around Yorua. Chapter 32 Sage Chakra. Your chakra seems to have a consciousness of its own, almost like it's bound to your will. Kakashi explained, his tone both thoughtful and serious. However, I don't fully understand this power yet, so I'm unable to control it properly. Despite the uncertainty, Yorua couldn't help but feel a little pleased. At least my chakra and speed doubled last night, he thought, a small smile forming on his face. Now, my chakra levels are probably on par with Kakashi-sensei's. Yorua murmured to himself, though my speed still falls short. But if things keep progressing like this, it won't take long to catch up. Pausing, he frowned. Still, my chakra is clearly different from the usual kind. I'll need to figure out exactly what's going on with it. If I can't control this explosive growth, then it won't matter how much it increases, it'll just be a disaster waiting to happen. Yorua sighed deeply, recalling the chaos from the previous night. I really don't want something like that to happen again. He glanced at the window in his mind's eye. I wonder how the village reacted to all that commotion. Hopefully, I'm not locked up in one of Hidden Leaf Village's cells right now. This uneasy thought lingered as his consciousness slowly slipped back into sleep. The next morning, Yorua's awareness returned, and he opened his eyes to the sight of Kakashi leaning casually against the windowsill, reading Cookie Paradise. Yorua sat up, rubbing his head as he asked, Kakashi-sensei, did the village's shinobi notice what happened last night? That was his biggest concern. Kakashi glanced over at him, a hint of surprise in his expression. You're awake already? I thought you'd be out for a few days at least. He sounded impressed. After all, Yorua's chakra had been completely depleted the night before, a condition that could be fatal for a shinobi. At best, it usually meant several days of recovery, if not worse. Yorua massaged his temples and replied, I've got a headache. What exactly happened last night? You don't remember? Kakashi asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Yorua shook his head. I only remember starting to gather chakra. I was just about to form Chidori when things spiraled out of control. After that, I blacked out. Kakashi's expression darkened as he explained, not even you remember? Last night, You unleashed a jutsu with power on par with a tail beast bomb. Yorua froze. A tail beast bomb? Seeing his confusion, Kakashi clarified, the tailed beast bomb is a technique where a tailed beast condenses a massive sphere of chakra. Its destructive power is incredible, enough to obliterate an entire mountain with one blast. He paused before continuing, the jutsu you released last night was comparable in strength. Fortunately, we were training in the mountains. If you'd used that in one of the residential areas of the village. Kakashi's tone grew heavier, you wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now. Yorua was stunned. It couldn't have been that strong, right? My chakra level isn't anywhere near enough to perform something so destructive. He knew he had caused a significant disturbance, but equating it to a tailed beast bomb seemed like a stretch. After all, that technique was essentially a map-wiping attack. Yorua glanced down at his hands, unsure? I mean, my chakra isn't even as large as yours, Kakashi-sensei. How could I possibly create a jutsu on that level? Kakashi walked over and studied him closely before finally saying, there's a force hidden within you, Yorua, something even you don't fully understand yet. A hidden power within you. The jutsu you unleashed last night must have been triggered by that power. Yorua froze, stunned. There was a hidden power in his body? How had he not known about this? Maybe it's because my chakra is different from normal people's. Yorua speculated aloud. This time, it was Kakashi's turn to look surprised. You're aware that your chakra is different from others? Kakashi had known Yorua's chakra was unusual because of his Sharingan. But how did Yorua know? Yorua lifted his gaze to meet Kakashi's, his tone calm. I've always known. The quality of my chakra is much stronger than an ordinary person's. It's just that, back when I didn't know any ninjutsu, I couldn't fully understand what made it different. Kakashi sighed in admiration. I thought you didn't realize it. Yorua smiled faintly. I'm also more sensitive to chakra than most people. That's how I could tell the difference. Kakashi nodded thoughtfully and said, I've used my Sharingan to observe your chakra before. It looks like sage chakra. He continued, I once witnessed Lord Jiraiya's chakra when he entered sage mode. At that time, his chakra resembled what's inside your body. That kind of chakra is sage chakra. What surprises me, Kakashi added, is that you've never trained in sage techniques, let alone entered sage mode. Yesterday, I reported your situation to the third Hokage. He said your condition might be similar to the first Hokage's. You may have been born with a sage body. Hearing that Kakashi had reported him to the third Hokage, Yorua's brows furrowed. He stared at Kakashi, his expression filled with doubt. He had trusted Kakashi, but this made him feel betrayed. Seeing Yorua's misunderstanding, Kakashi quickly explained the situation. In that scenario, if I hadn't reported it, you would have been in even greater danger. But fortunately, the Hokage doesn't see you as a threat. In fact, he instructed me to continue mentoring you. Yorua's expression remained serious, but after some thought, he let it go. After all, he had no grand ambitions. Regardless of what the third Hokage did, Yorua wasn't one to go down without a fight. Once he sorted through his thoughts, Yorua stopped dwelling on the matter. Kakashi had been watching him intently. At first, when Yorua looked distrustful and tense, Kakashi felt guilty. But when Yorua quickly regained his composure, Kakashi couldn't help but admire him. He realized that Yorua had already thought it through. When Kakashi had been Yorua's age, such significant matters would have taken him much longer to process. In terms of mental fortitude, Kakashi admitted he wasn't Yorua's equal. After clearing his thoughts, Yorua turned to Kakashi and said, Kakashi-sensei, you should go home and get some rest. You probably didn't sleep last night. Deep down, Yorua was touched. Kakashi had stayed by his side all night. Knowing Yorua wasn't upset with him, Kakashi relaxed. I'm fine. For a shinobi, staying up one night isn't a big deal. Even so, Yorua insisted, you should still rest. I don't have any missions today, and I want to figure out what's going on with my chakra. Kakashi walked closer, a hint of concern in his voice. That power inside you is likely very strong. Controlling it might not be easy. Yorua nodded. I can feel that. It got out of control last night. Even though I had already formed Chidori, just as I was about to attack, my chakra went berserk. But I think I can control that power. Last night's problem was just me not having enough mastery over that chakra, which caused it to spiral out of control. Chapter 33 Kakashi, although wanting to chat with Yorua a bit longer, decided against it as he realized Yorua needed rest. He said, take a good rest first. Train only after you're fully recovered. Yorua nodded. Without saying anything further, Kakashi disappeared from the room. Once Yorua could no longer sense Kakashi's chakra, he exhaled in relief. Looking down at his hands, Yorua frowned. What's really going on here? Even with such precise control, it still went out of control. The chakra inside me is indeed strange. After a moment, Yoru began to slowly channel chakra into his hands. In no time, the chakra materialized around his hands. But unlike the usual blue color, Yoru's chakra was now golden. This discovery left him even more astonished. My chakra really is different from others. Could this be the sage chakra Kakashi mentioned? But isn't sage chakra supposed to be blue as well? And this dense feeling, it seems much stronger than regular chakra. Yoru felt unfamiliar with the chakra inside his body. Besides, my chakra control should be excellent. How did it go berserk last night? No matter how he thought about it, Yoru couldn't figure it out. This system of mine is too rigid. It doesn't even let me ask questions. Looks like I'll have to figure this out myself. After leaving Yoru's house, Kakashi headed straight for Kion Toichi. When Toichi heard that the commotion from last night was caused by Yoru, he was stunned. It was really Yoru? Toichi found it hard to believe. Though he was aware of Yoru's exceptional talent, the scale of the incident last night was beyond what even he could achieve. No matter how strong Yoru was, there was no way he could have caused destruction comparable to a tail beast bomb at his current level. But Kakashi nodded affirmatively, confirming the matter. Toichi couldn't calm the turmoil in his heart. What's going on with Yoru? This event completely exceeded Toichi's imagination. He had originally assumed that the commotion last night was caused by Naruto losing control. Although the third Hokage had claimed it was the result of an Anbu ninjutsu experiment, most of the Jonin in the village knew the general truth of the matter. Almost all the Jonin believed that the Nine Tails had gone berserk. The third Hokage had suppressed the information to protect Naruto. After all, Jinchuriki were already despised by the people in the village. If the villagers learned that the commotion last night was caused by Naruto losing control, they might take action against him. Such incidents were something all Jinchuriki had faced. For example, Killer B had even been targeted for assassination by members of his own village. Compared to Killer B, Naruto's treatment was significantly better. No one threw eggs at Naruto, nor did anyone attempt to assassinate him. At most, they just kept their distance. One must remember, during the Nine Tails rampage, many villagers lost their loved ones. And since Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, in their eyes, he was essentially the Nine Tails itself, their enemy. Even under such circumstances, Naruto wasn't short on friends. Shikamaru, Choji, Shino, and Kiba were the kind of troublemakers who would even skip class with Naruto. And there was also Toki and Iom from the Akiraku ramen shop, who held no ill will toward Naruto. Compared to Killer B, Naruto's treatment was essentially no different from that of an ordinary person. But if the villagers learned that Naruto had lost control, no matter how much the third Hokage favored him, the villagers likely wouldn't tolerate Naruto anymore. Who would want to stay near someone who was like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment? They would probably demand that the third Hokage imprison Naruto. At that point, even if the villagers learned that Naruto was the son of the fourth Hokage, it wouldn't matter. After all, Minato no Mikaze had only served as Hokage for a few years. His status in the hearts of the villagers wasn't very high, even though he was the hero who saved the village. But no matter how much of a hero he was, if his son was an uncontrollable threat, a weapon of mass destruction that could one day lose control and kill countless people, no one would gamble their lives on it. Under such circumstances, even if Naruto was the son of a hero, no one would want to take the risk. This was why the Jonin of Hidden Leaf Village believed the third Hokage had deliberately suppressed the information to maintain stability and prevent panic among the villagers. Who would have thought that the person responsible for such a massive commotion was their own student? Kion Toichi's brain froze for a moment, unable to process the information. At the same time, he was overwhelmed with anxiety. Who else knows about this? What Toichi feared most was Yoru being exposed to others. If that happened, Yoru's treatment wouldn't be much better than Naruto's. Kakashi hesitated before replying, "Only the third Hokage and I know about it." Toichi raised his head and glared at Kakashi. "You told the third Hokage?" Toichi was furious. Now that the third Hokage knew, Toichi was well aware of what Yoru's fate might be. He was so angry he nearly attacked Kakashi. Kakashi quickly explained, "Calm down. The third Hokage hasn't taken him away, and he even has high hopes for Yoru. You don't need to worry so much." But Toichi wasn't so easily convinced. You know how unreliable the third Hokage's promises can be. As someone who had worked in the Anbu, Toichi had seen plenty of Hidden Leaf Village's darker side. Kakashi sighed and said, "Think about it. In that situation yesterday, do you think keeping it a secret would have been better or worse for Yoru? If I hadn't said anything, and the third Hokage had found out on his own, Yoru would probably spend the rest of his life under constant Anbu surveillance. Now, the best thing we can do is help Yoru quickly master the power within him, so he has the ability to protect himself. We need to let the third Hokage see his value. That's the only way he can live openly under the sun. Kakashi's emotions grew agitated. Normally, he was calm and composed, but when it came to Yoru, his emotions were easily affected. Toichi fell silent. He knew Kakashi was right. If the third Hokage were to investigate the truth, Yoru would be quickly exposed. When that happened, Yoru would be seen as a threat to Hidden Leaf Village. Even if he weren't imprisoned, he'd likely be under constant Anbu surveillance. Any minor action Yoru took might prompt the Anbu to act against him. After a long pause, Toichi finally asked, "What kind of power is inside Yoru? How could it be so terrifying?" Toichi had witnessed the devastation from the previous night. The sheer magnitude of the power was comparable to the tailed beast bombs used by the Nine Tails during its rampage years ago. Fortunately, it had occurred in the mountains. If it had been in Hidden Leaf Village, the entire residential area would have been leveled. This was no exaggeration. At the center of the explosion caused by Yoru was a massive crater hundreds of meters wide. The shockwave extended for several kilometers. Within that radius, trees, plants, and rocks were reduced to ash. Such destructive power could only be compared to that of a tailed beast bomb. For this reason, when the explosion occurred, many Jonin had assumed it was caused by the Nine Tails losing control and unleashing a tailed beast bomb. Chapter 34 Kakashi said, "The power inside Yoru should be Sage Chakra. When Lord Jiraiya enters Sage mode, his body also has that kind of chakra. Sage Chakra is much stronger than ordinary chakra. It's just that Yoru has never studied Sage Jutsus." The third Hokage speculated that Yoru might have a naturally inherited Sage body, meaning his chakra is inherently Sage Chakra. Plus, Yoru has an enormous amount of chakra. With the boost from Sage Chakra, if all his Sage Chakra was completely drained, it might explain the large-scale jutsu he performed last night. Honestly, Kakashi found this explanation somewhat far-fetched. He had witnessed Jiraiya's Sage mode before. While it was indeed powerful, none of the jutsu Jiraiya used could match the scale of destruction Yoru had unleashed last night. Not to mention that Yoru's technique had directly annihilated everything within several kilometers of the explosion's center. It was clear that the destruction Yoru caused last night far exceeded anything Jiraiya was capable of. But beyond this explanation, Kakashi couldn't think of any other way to rationalize the terrifying power Yoru had released. Toichi, who hadn't witnessed Yoru's jutsu firsthand, believed Kakashi's explanation. That kind of power is already on par with a tailed beast's. If Yoru can master that power, he would have strength comparable to a tailed beast, wouldn't he? Toichi looked at Kakashi. Kakashi, however, frowned. It's probably not that simple. Yoru still can't control that power, and he doesn't fully understand its nature either. But fortunately, even when that power runs wild, Yoru always remains conscious. Unlike a Jinchuriki, who loses control and is completely overtaken by the tailed beast during a rampage. So, I believe that the power inside Yoru is just a vast amount of chakra hidden within him. As long as Yoru continues to train, he should be able to master it eventually. However, it's not something that can be achieved in a short period. I'll help him. Kakashi finished with a firm and serious tone. Toichi breathed a sigh of relief after hearing this. As long as that power isn't like a tailed beast's and won't take over his body, that's a relief. Kakashi shook his head. It won't. It's just that Yoru can't control that power yet, which is why it goes out of control. What's even more unbelievable is that Yoru, who was at the center of the explosion, survived completely unharmed, not even a scratch. Even after his chakra was completely drained, he just needed one night of sleep to fully recover. That level of recovery ability is already on par with Naruto. No, even Naruto might not have such an extraordinary recovery rate. Kakashi said with amazement. He had stayed with Yoru the entire night, contemplating many things. These were all conclusions he had came to during that time. So, I believe that the power inside Yoru might indeed be linked to the natural sage body the third Hokage mentioned. The third Hokage also said that the first Hokage, who had a natural sage body, had incredible regenerative abilities. To the extent that even if his body was pierced, he could heal in a short amount of time. Fully recovered within moments. Toichi listened to all of this, feeling as though he was hearing a mythical tale. That's no longer human, is it? It sounds more like divine power. He said. Kakashi sighed. I was also stunned when I first heard about it. But the third Hokage, having lived through the first Hokage's era, described the first as being nearly godlike. The first Hokage also had an enormous amount of chakra. During the wars, he frequently unleashed jutsu on par with tail beast bombs. It's hard to imagine how other shinobi must have felt living in the first Hokage's time. The third Hokage even said that Yoru might one day wield the same level of power as the first Hokage. Kiyotoichi's expression turned serious. With such potential, isn't the third Hokage worried about Yoru becoming a threat to Hidden Leaf Village in the future? This was his main concern. The stronger Yoru became, the greater the damage he could cause if he ever turned against Hidden Leaf Village. Wouldn't the third Hokage have reservations? Kakashi shook his head. We can only hope that the third Hokage doesn't start harboring such thoughts and that Yoru remains loyal to Hidden Leaf Village. As his mentors, it's our responsibility to ensure he doesn't walk the path of opposing Hidden Leaf Village. But honestly, you don't need to worry too much. Yoru is different from others, he's calm and not easily manipulated. Kiyotoichi chuckled. That's true. If anyone tries to manipulate that kid, it's practically impossible. Not to mention, he's rational and won't develop a negative impression of Hidden Leaf Village just because he sees one or two dark incidents. The ninja world was filled with emotionally driven individuals. Few could approach problems with cool-headed rationality. Many shinobi, upon witnessing the darker side of their villages, began doubting their loyalty. But Yoru wasn't like that. He was logical, and both Kiyotoichi and Kakashi had even discussed such matters with him. Yoru always responded with remarkable maturity. He even understood the necessity of such things. After all, a shinobi village, as the military cornerstone of a nation, could not solely consist of deeds performed in the light. There were bound to be dark and dirty tasks that were essential for maintaining peace and stability for the majority. Kiyotoichi remarked, well, his mentors are both shinobi from the Anbu, after all. Kakashi nodded in agreement. Of course, when it came to Naruto and the others, Kakashi didn't intend to expose them to such darkness. They were still too immature in their thinking. If they learned of such things prematurely, it might shatter them. Similarly, Kiyotoichi wouldn't let Yamada Jumoku and Hanyataka delve into such matters. After staying with Kiyotoichi for a while, Kakashi left. Today, he had to take Naruto and his team to accept a mission. Soon, the four gathered in front of the Hokage Tower. At the entrance of the Hokage Tower, Kakashi arrived late as usual. Naruto and the other three scolded him, Kakashi-sensei, you're late again. Kakashi looked at Naruto and sighed. Seeing Naruto reminded him that he was currently teaching 3 fresh graduates from the Ninja Academy. Yoru's maturity often made Kakashi forget his age and the significant age gap between them. Casually, Kakashi explained, sorry about that. I ran into an old lady crossing the street on my way here. Hearing Kakashi come up with yet another excuse as always, the 3 students couldn't help but twitch their lips. Naruto grumbled, Kakashi-sensei, you've got way too many excuses. Kakashi waved his hand dismissively. Alright, let's just go take on a mission. The 4 headed toward the Hokage Tower. Sakura walked up beside Sasuke with a smile and asked, Sasuke, did you see it last night? That explosion? Chapter 35. Sakura finished speaking, and Sasuke frowned slightly, nodding gravely. On the other hand, Naruto, looking utterly confused, leaned in and asked, What? What explosion? Last night, Naruto had slept soundly, completely unaware of the commotion. Sakura rolled her eyes at him. She then turned to Sasuke with an expectant expression. Although Sasuke usually acted aloof, he had clearly noticed the explosion last night. Moreover, the explosion was anything but ordinary. Sasuke had never witnessed such a terrifying explosion, so much so that he had briefly wondered if another village had launched an attack. I'm not sure, but I can tell you this much, even a Jonin couldn't pull off an explosion like that. Sakura froze for a moment. She had only known that last night's explosion was loud and massive. She hadn't considered anything beyond that. Not even a Jonin? Not even Kakashi-sensei? Sakura glanced at Kakashi. Naruto, walking beside them, scratched his head, desperate to join the conversation but completely clueless about what had happened. Sasuke also turned to look at Kakashi. Kakashi, however, acted as if he hadn't noticed their stares and stayed silent. Kakashi-sensei, you must know what happened last night, right? Even you couldn't have done that, could you? Under the trio's watchful gazes, Kakashi shook his head and said, I couldn't either. But last night's explosion was just the village's research department testing a new ninjutsu. There's no need for you to overthink it. Sasuke seemed pensive after hearing this. However, he didn't press further. He could tell Kakashi wasn't telling the full truth. Still, since it involved the village's higher-ups, Sasuke decided not to probe. Seeing that Sasuke had dropped the subject, Sakura also chose to let it go. Naruto, however, remained completely baffled. He had no idea what was going on. The 4 of them arrived at the Hokage's office. Seeing Kakashi's team, the 3rd Hokage glanced at Kakashi. Kakashi gave a slight nod in return. Both of them understood what it meant. As soon as Naruto stepped into the office, he rushed up to the third Hokage, complaining, "Old man Hokage, stop giving us those boring, low-level missions." The third Hokage looked at Naruto and sighed, "You've only just graduated from the ninja academy. You're still an apprentice ninja, so it's only natural for you to gain experience through lower-level missions. Besides, you're still just gain in. At most, you're only eligible for D-rank missions." But Naruto shook his head and said, "But those D-rank missions are way too boring. I want higher-level missions." While the Hokage's words were reasonable, Naruto was so fed up with D-rank missions that he resorted to whining. On the side, although Sakura and Sasuke didn't voice their opinions, they secretly agreed with Naruto. They, too, were tired of doing low-level missions. Kakashi, on the other hand, sighed internally, thinking, "I knew this was coming." At that moment, his thoughts drifted to Yoru. I wonder how that kid's doing now. After having all his chakra drained yesterday, he only rested for one night before waking up. I hope there are no lasting effects. In that instant, Kakashi's mind was miles away. Meanwhile, as Naruto continued pestering, the third Hokage finally gave in. "Alright, fine. I'll assign you a C-rank mission." Naruto, who had been sitting on the floor with his back to the Hokage, immediately jumped up upon hearing those words. Naruto jumped up excitedly. "Really? What kind of mission is it?" Seeing Naruto's eager expression, the third Hokage chuckled. "It's a protection mission." The moment Naruto heard it was a protection mission, his imagination ran wild. Protect who? A daimyo? Or maybe a princess? Kakashi glanced at Naruto's expectant face and felt speechless. Protecting a daimyo wouldn't be just a C-rank mission. Although Sasuke and Sakura didn't indulge in wild fantasies like Naruto, they were still curious and hopeful. After all, they didn't want to continue doing tasks like chasing stray cats and dogs. The third didn't answer Naruto's question but instead called toward the door. "Please, come in." All four turned their attention to the entrance. Soon, the door opened. An old man holding a bottle of sake walked in, leaning against the doorway as he scrutinized the group. Taking a swig from his bottle, he said grumpily, "What's this? Just a bunch of brats? Especially that short one, he looks so stupid. Are you really a ninja?" Hearing the old man's words, Naruto laughed awkwardly. "Haha, who are you talking about? The short one who looks stupid?" As he spoke, Sakura and Sasuke silently moved to stand behind him. When he realized the comparison, Naruto's grin froze instantly. "You old geezer. Who are you calling stupid? I'll kill you, you jerk." Naruto lunged forward, flailing, but Kakashi easily restrained him. "Are you planning to kill the person we're supposed to protect, idiot?" Ignoring Naruto's outburst, the old man said, "I'm Tazuna, the world-famous bridge builder. That's me. During the time I'm building my bridge, you brats better protect me properly." Naruto glared at Tazuna, crossing his arms in frustration and turning his head away, clearly unhappy. Meanwhile, Sakura and Sasuke, upon hearing it was a protection mission outside the village, were full of anticipation. This was their first real mission as ninjas. Kakashi, however, frowned. An out-of-village mission? He felt uneasy. Not because leaving the village for a mission was dangerous, but because he was worried about Yoru's safety while he was gone. After all, who could say for sure if the third Hokage would keep the promise he had made the previous night? What if the third used this mission as an excuse to send him away and then targeted Yoru? Could Kiyotoichi stop them? Clearly, the answer was no. Though Kiyotoichi was a jonin from the Anbu, his status in Hidden Lee Village couldn't compare to Kakashi's. The third held Kakashi in high regard. And rightfully so, Kakashi was currently the strongest jonin in the village. With Tsunade and Jiraiya absent and Guy in his normal state, Kakashi was unmatched among the jonin. This made him the only one the third trusted to protect Yoru. If Kakashi were present, the third would honor his word. But if he left, it was uncertain whether the third could resist pressure from Danzō and others to abandon Yoru. Noticing Kakashi's complicated expression, the third Hokage understood his concerns. He said, "Kakashi, this mission will allow Naruto and the others to see the world beyond the village. As their teacher, this is your responsibility." Kakashi frowned. The third was reminding him not to neglect his current role. But the more the third insisted, the more uneasy Kakashi felt. Naruto, hearing the third Hokage's words, grinned broadly and said, "Haha, old man. I'll complete this mission perfectly and show you how amazing I am." Kakashi stayed silent. As the group was about to leave, Kakashi couldn't hold back any longer. He turned to the third Hokage and said, "Lord Hokage, since this mission involves leaving the village, I'd like to bring Yoru along." Jonin Kion requested that I take his student along when I went on missions outside the village. Chapter 36. Hearing Kakashi's request, the third Hokage's expression turned serious, and he remained silent for a long time. The atmosphere in the office became icy cold. However, apart from Kakashi and the third, no one knew what was really happening. And no one dared to speak. Even Naruto, usually so boisterous, could feel the oppressive tension in the air. Sasuke, deep in thought, glanced at Kakashi. After what felt like an eternity, the third Hokage finally took a drag from his pipe and spoke slowly. If that's the case, your team will have 4 members. It's just one more person. Kakashi replied firmly, showing no intention of backing down. Kakashi, if anything happens to him, you'll be the one to take responsibility. The third said with a stern tone. Kakashi did not waver. I'll take responsibility. Unexpectedly, the third, who had been so serious, suddenly smiled. It seems Yorua is quite lucky. The third had been testing Kakashi to gauge the depth of his relationship with Yorua. To his surprise, the usually aloof Kakashi was willing to go this far to protect Yorua, almost to the point of direct confrontation. Instead of feeling threatened, the third felt pleased. He knew Kakashi's character well, and someone Kakashi valued this much couldn't be a problem. Kakashi watched the third Hokage, who eventually nodded and said, "Looks like the mission reward will now have to be split among one more person." Kakashi exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Lord Hokage." The third nodded. "Go and bring him along." With that, Kakashi nodded back and left the office with Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura in tow. After Kakashi and the others had left, Iruka finally mustered the courage to ask, "Lord Hokage, the Yorua that Kakashi mentioned, could it be the same Yorua who graduated this year?" The third nodded. Iruka was puzzled. Yorua shouldn't have caused such a tense confrontation between the two, right? That oppressive atmosphere was something Iruka had never experienced before. Moreover, it was between the strongest Jonin in the village and the Hokage, the most authoritative figure in Hidden Leaf Village. Kakashi had always struck him as mature and rational. What could possibly lead to such a standoff between Kakashi and the Hokage? What exactly did Yorua do, Lord Hokage? You seem to disapprove of him? Iruka asked cautiously. The third glanced at Iruka. I don't disapprove of him. Iruka said nothing, but his expression clearly showed his skepticism. The third didn't elaborate further. Seeing the Hokage's reluctance, Iruka tentatively asked, "Isn't Yorua under the guidance of Jonin Kion? Why would Kakashi request to take him along?" The third replied indifferently, "This is not something you need to concern yourself with, Iruka." Understanding the implicit warning in the third's tone, Iruka didn't dare press further. Once outside the Hokage's office, Naruto couldn't hold back any longer. "Kakashi-sensei, why did you and the old man Hokage look like you were about to fight?" Naruto's question echoed the thoughts of both Sakura and Sasuke, who had also been curious but too intimidated to ask earlier. Sasuke, in particular, felt that Yorua might not be as simple as he seemed. Kakashi glanced at Naruto and, unwilling to explain, simply said, "You." Naruto pouted. "Kakashi-sensei, do you think I'm dumb? That atmosphere just now, you two were practically ready to fight, and you still say I misunderstood. And why are you bringing Yorua along? You're supposed to be our teacher." Naruto was clearly unhappy. After all, Yorua wasn't part of their team. Kakashi specifically requesting to include Yorua felt to Naruto like Kakashi didn't trust their abilities. Sasuke, however, thought differently. He suspected Yorua wasn't as ordinary as he appeared and that Kakashi knew something about Yorua's true capabilities. More importantly, it seemed like Kakashi had a special relationship with Yorua. Otherwise, why would Kakashi confront the third Hokage so directly for him? This thought made Sasuke feel a bit envious. Kakashi was their mentor, yet he had gone to such lengths for a ninja from another team. Sasuke couldn't help but think Yorua might hold a higher place in Kakashi's regard than they did. Deep down, beneath his stoic exterior, Sasuke was just a somewhat prideful teenager. Kakashi, hearing Naruto's complaints, thought for a moment before replying, "Yorua has also taken me as his teacher. He's technically my student, too." Naruto and the others were stunned. "What? Yorua's your student too?" They couldn't believe it. Although they often complained about Kakashi, they all respected his strength. During their training at the practice field, they had already acknowledged his abilities. On top of that, from what Shikamaru and the others had shared, the three of them were well aware that Kakashi was one of the most powerful Jonin in Hidden Leaf Village. Despite not voicing it, they felt proud to have Kakashi as their mentor. But now Kakashi claimed Yorua was also his student. Judging by how much Kakashi seemed to value Yorua, it was likely he had taught Yorua many jutsu. The thought made all three of them feel a bit unbalanced. Naruto outright shouted, "What? That sneaky Yorua. Kakashi-sensei, you must have taught him tons of jutsu, didn't you? You haven't even taught us anything yet. This is so unfair. Though Sakura and Sasuke didn't say anything, their expressions clearly showed they shared Naruto's frustration. Kakashi, however, remained calm and said indifferently, I haven't taught him any jutsu. I've known him for much less time than I've known you three. But none of them believed him. Naruto snorted. Humphrey, Kakashi-sensei, you're lying to us again, aren't you? Kakashi didn't bother to explain further and simply said, believe what you want. As they spoke, they arrived at Yorua's house. It was Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke's first time visiting Yorua's home. At that moment, Yorua was inside, focused on studying his chakra. The sudden arrival of Kakashi and the others left him confused. Kakashi patted Yorua on the shoulder. We've been assigned a C-rank mission outside the village. I requested permission from Lord Hokage to bring you along for some experience. Yorua frowned. Outside the village? Kakashi nodded. Naruto chimed in with a grin, it's a bodyguard mission this time. Sakura, meanwhile, took her first serious look at Yorua and was surprised. This guy is just as handsome as Sasuke. How come I never noticed him before? Of course, Sakura's thoughts were purely admiration for his looks, not romantic feelings. Her affection for Sasuke was unwavering. Later, if it hadn't been for Shikamaru and the others egging her on, Sakura wouldn't have confessed to Naruto. She had always been clear that she liked Sasuke. So it was nearly impossible for her to develop feelings for someone else. Sasuke, on the other hand, was scrutinizing Yorua, trying to discern what made him special. But no matter how long he observed, he couldn't figure it out. Apart from being as handsome as him, there didn't seem to be anything remarkable. Chapter 37. Before Yorua could respond, Naruto grabbed him and started pulling him outside. What are you waiting for? Let's go. This is a C-rank mission. How long do you think you'd have to wait to get one of those if you stayed in the village? Although Kakashi's regard for Yorua made Naruto jealous, he didn't dislike him. After all, Yorua was one of the few who hadn't shown any disdain toward him in the past. As Yorua was pulled out of his house, he glanced back at Kakashi, puzzled. Why was Kakashi suddenly taking him on a mission? Kakashi had told him before that he wouldn't bring him on missions until he reached the level of a Jonin. Yorua couldn't believe Kakashi would break his word without a reason. Curious about what was going on, Yorua asked Naruto during their journey. Naruto eagerly explained what had happened at the Hokage's office. After hearing the story, Yorua understood why Kakashi had brought him along. Understanding the reason, Yorua didn't question it further and had no intention of rejecting Kakashi's kindness. At the gates of Hidden Leaf Village, Tazuna saw Yorua and grinned. Now this is what a ninja looks like, not like that clumsy kid over there. He was referring to Naruto. Naruto gritted his teeth and glared at Tazuna, but remembering that Tazuna was their escort mission's target, he restrained himself this time. As they traveled, the group remained mostly silent, except for Naruto, who chattered incessantly. Sasuke kept a close eye on Yorua, while Sakura was curious about him as well. Sasuke wanted to gauge Yorua's strength. He knew how strong Kakashi was, and for Kakashi to value Yorua so much, there was no way Yorua could be weak. But just how strong was he? That's what Sasuke wanted to find out. After walking for some time, they passed through a forested area. When Yorua saw two puddles ahead, he glanced at Kakashi. Kakashi subtly shook his head, signaling him not to act rashly. Although Yorua had long forgotten the details of the Land of Waves arc, he could sense chakra fluctuations from the puddles. It was clear that two ninja were hiding there. The situation was even more suspicious because it was a sunny day, and the ground everywhere else was dry. The water in the puddles hadn't evaporated at all, which was odd. Both Kakashi and Yorua noticed the peculiarity but pretended not to and calmly walked past the puddles. When they were about 10 steps past the puddles, two ninjas suddenly leapt out. Clang! The sound of chains rattling filled the air, and bladed chains quickly wrapped around Kakashi. By the time Yorua and the others turned to look, Kakashi's body was already shredded into pieces. Flesh and blood splattered onto the ground, staining it red. The gruesome sight left the inexperienced group frozen in shock. Even Yorua, who had expected Kakashi to use a substitution jutsu, felt a jolt of unease at the gory scene. It was his first time witnessing something so blood-soaked. Even though he knew it wasn't real, the sight made him uncomfortable. If it weren't for his strong mental fortitude, he might have thrown up on the spot. Almost immediately, the two ninja, thinking they had successfully killed Kakashi, turned their attention to the group and charged at them. Naruto was completely paralyzed with fear from what he had just seen. Sasuke, on the other hand, reacted swiftly. The moment the two ninjas swung their chain blades, Sasuke countered by throwing several kunai. Clang! One kunai pinned the chain blade to a nearby tree. However, this attack was only a feint. The two ninjas' real target was Tazuna. They moved with remarkable speed, appearing in front of Tazuna almost instantly. Realizing he had fallen for the distraction, Sasuke immediately shouted, "Sakura, watch out!" He tried to rush to help, but he was too far away to make it in time. Sakura, though inexperienced, wasn't entirely helpless. While she lacked advanced jutsu, she wasn't paralyzed with fear like Naruto. She drew her kunai and stood protectively in front of Tazuna. Foolish. The two ninjas sneered at her defiance, clearly underestimating her strength. It was obvious to them that Sakura posed no real threat. But just as they closed in on her, they suddenly felt a crushing force slam into their chests. Boom. Boom. Crash. In an instant, the two ninjas were sent hurtling backward like cannonballs, smashing through rows of trees before coming to a stop. Sakura stood there, clutching her kunai, staring in shock at Yorua, who had stepped in front of her. Yorua's expression was calm and composed. Everyone else was stunned into silence. After what felt like an eternity, Sakura finally found her voice, trembling as she said, "Why Yorua? Thank you." She hadn't even seen Yorua move, but it was clear that he had been the one to send the ninjas flying. Behind her, Tazuna, who had been bracing for death, snapped back to reality. Looking at Yorua's back, he felt an overwhelming sense of safety. Muttering to himself, he said, "I knew this kid was reliable." Meanwhile, Sasuke, who had been eager to gauge Yorua's strength, was now frozen in shock, his gaze fixed on him. Inwardly, Sasuke was reeling. "Even with my Sharingan, I couldn't see his movements. This guy's a monster." Sasuke prided himself on his abilities, but Yorua's speed had surpassed anything he could comprehend. Even though his Sharingan was only at the 1 Tomoe stage, it should have been enough to track most ninjas' movements. His speed is terrifying, so fast that even the Sharingan couldn't keep up, Sasuke thought. Watching from the shadows, Kakashi was equally astonished. He had always known Yorua had immense talent and possessed at least Chunin-level strength. But what Yorua had just demonstrated wasn't just Chunin level. Even though Yorua had only used Taijutsu, his power had clearly increased several times since their last sparring session. Walking over to where the two ninjas had landed, Kakashi examined their mangled bodies. Their chests were a mess of blood and torn flesh. Murmuring to himself, Kakashi said, "How much force did he put into those kicks to leave them like this?" The two ninjas showed no signs of life. They were Chunin level, and this kid took them out instantly. Has Yorua's strength reached the point where he can one-shot two Chunin? Kakashi found it hard to believe. His progress is too fast. The last time Kakashi had tested Yorua, his strength was at the high end of Chunin level, impressive but still within normal limits. But the power Yorua had just displayed was on a completely different level. It was clear that Yorua's current strength was at least Jonin level, and this was with Taijutsu alone. And Kakashi hadn't forgotten, Yorua had also learned the Chidori. Although that night, Yorua had seemed to lose control of his chakra after using it, Kakashi had seen him successfully execute the technique. The chakra surge afterward had only amplified the Chidori's power. Even if Yorua's chakra control wasn't perfect yet, his taijutsu alone now rivaled that of a Jonin. Chapter 38 Yorua's growth in strength was simply too rapid. Even though Kakashi had always thought Yorua's talent was extraordinary and that he had the potential to rival the fourth Hokage someday, he hadn't expected his power to increase this quickly. Now, Yorua only lacked a few high-damage jutsu. And considering his exceptional aptitude for learning techniques, it wouldn't be long before Yorua truly attained Jonin-level strength, or perhaps even elite Jonin. Shaking his head, Kakashi formed a series of hand seals. Earth-style wall. In an instant, earthen walls rose around the two ninjas' corpses, burying them within. After completing the task, Kakashi emerged from the forest, his gaze scanning the broken trees along the way. Even Kakashi couldn't help but feel amazed. How strong is this kid to break these massive trees like this? This wasn't even a direct attack, just the residual impact, and yet so many trees were destroyed. Even most ninjutsu couldn't achieve this. When Kakashi reached the group, Yorua stood calmly, his expression unruffled. Seeing Kakashi approach, Yorua asked, "What happened to those two ninjas?" "They're both dead." Kakashi sighed. "Do you know who they were?" Though Yorua knew the two were from Hidden Mist Village, he still asked. "Two Chunin from the Hidden Mist. Their target was likely Mr. Tazuna." Kakashi replied, his gaze turning to Tazuna. Kakashi was certain Tazuna had concealed the true difficulty of this mission. Two ninja, Chunin, no less, made this far more dangerous than a C-rank mission. This was more akin to a B-rank mission, and Kakashi suspected the Chunin wouldn't be the strongest opponents they'd face. It was clear these two had been sent as scouts. This mission could very well involve Jonin-level enemies, which would classify it as A rank. The gap between a C rank mission and an A rank mission was immense, not just in difficulty but also in cost. While a C rank mission would cost no more than 50,000 ryo, an E rank mission required at least 150,000 ryo. Yorua also turned his gaze to Tazuna. With two pairs of eyes fixed on him, Tazuna grew visibly nervous. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. Kakashi's tone turned cold. "Mr. Tazuna, those two ninja were targeting you." Tazuna quickly denied it. "That's impossible. They were clearly after you guys." Kakashi frowned. Sensing Kakashi's displeasure, Yorua intervened. "Mr. Tazuna, if you don't explain the full details of this mission, we cannot guarantee we'll continue to protect you. There's no need to hide anything. I believe those two ninja won't be the last ones we encounter. If we abandon the mission, what do you think will happen to you?" Yorua knew that if he didn't press Tazuna for answers, Kakashi might call off the mission entirely. Tazuna initially hesitated, but when he saw the seriousness in Yorua's eyes, he sighed and confessed the truth. After explaining everything, Tazuna turned to Yorua and Kakashi with a pleading look. "The Land of Waves desperately needs that bridge. I know I hid the true difficulty of the mission, but our country is so poor, we don't even have our own ninja. And we can't afford the commission for an A-rank mission. Please, help the Land of Waves." Tazuna pleaded, bowing his head. "Please." Saying this, Tazuna knelt on the ground. Yorua glanced at Kakashi without saying anything. He was waiting for Kakashi to make the decision, as it was ultimately Kakashi's call whether or not to proceed with the mission. Kakashi helped Tazuna to his feet and turned to Yorua and the rest. "What do you all think? Should we continue with this mission or head back to the village?" Kakashi left the decision to the group. Yorua remained silent. Sasuke, meanwhile, had his eyes fixed on Yorua, still reeling from the sheer power Yorua had displayed earlier. Sakura, seeing that Sasuke didn't speak, kept quiet as well. Naruto stood there frozen, still in shock, unable to process what had happened. No one spoke, and Tazuna grew increasingly anxious. If Kakashi and his team refused to escort him, there was no way the bridge in the Land of Waves would ever be completed. After all, Gato had hired a Jonin-level ninja, and only someone like Kakashi, a Jonin himself, could offer sufficient protection. And after witnessing Yorua's strength, Tazuna was confident in him as well. In Tazuna's mind, as long as Kakashi and Yorua were around, even Gato's hired Jonin wouldn't stand a chance. Kakashi looked at Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura and shook his head. The three of them were still novices, completely shaken by the events they had just experienced. Finally, Kakashi turned his gaze to Yorua. Yorua was a bit speechless. He hadn't intended to say anything since this wasn't his mission. It was Team 7's responsibility, not his. But Yorua also felt that if he stayed silent any longer, Kakashi might actually decide to call off the mission. "Kakashi-sensei, I think we should continue the mission. I'm willing to trust what Mr. Tazune has said," Yorua said at last. Kakashi nodded. "Since you've said so, we'll continue with the mission. But Mr. Tazuna, you need to tell us exactly what kind of ninja have been hired to kill you so that we can prepare accordingly." Hearing that Kakashi agreed to proceed, Tazuna was overjoyed. He quickly explained Gato's involvement and added, "Gato has hired a Jonin from the Hidden Mist, apparently a very strong one." Kakashi murmured to himself, "As I thought, there really is a Jonin." His expression grew serious. This was no simple task, especially since he was responsible for 4 Genin. He wasn't too worried about Yorua. But Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura were genuine Genin with no experience. Against a Jonin, their chances of survival were slim. Kakashi turned to Yorua. "Yorua, I'll leave Mr. Tazuna in your care. No matter what happens, you must ensure his safety." Then he addressed the others. "Sasuke, Naruto, Sakura, you 3 must stay close to Yorua. If you get separated, the enemy will easily pick you off one by one." Sasuke was clearly displeased. Kakashi's words implied that Yorua was stronger than him. But remembering the power Yorua had just displayed, Sasuke reluctantly nodded. Sakura had no objections. After all, Yorua had just saved her life. Without him, she would have been killed earlier. Seeing Sasuke agree, Sakura naturally followed suit. Naruto, however, still stood there, dazed. Kakashi sighed and looked at him. "Naruto, what about you?" Snapped back to reality by Kakashi's words, Naruto stammered, "Huh? I have no objections." In that moment, he fully realized the gap between himself, Yorua, and even Sasuke. Although Sasuke hadn't performed as well as Yorua earlier, he had still been the best among the 3 Genin. As for himself, he had done absolutely nothing, standing frozen the entire time. Biting his lip in shame at his own weakness, Naruto vowed to himself, "Next time, I'll stand in front of Sasuke and Yoru. I'll surpass them both. Determined, Naruto suddenly drew a kunai and stabbed it into his own palm. Ah! Everyone was stunned. Naruto's self-inflicted injury was completely unexpected. Kakashi quickly nodded. Though your earlier performance wasn't ideal, it's good that you're reflecting on your actions. Truthfully, Kakashi wasn't entirely satisfied with Naruto's behavior earlier. But considering it was his first mission outside the village and his first encounter with such dangerous enemies, his poor performance was understandable. Now that Naruto was showing self-awareness and determination, it was a positive sign. As for the earlier crisis, Yoru hadn't originally planned to intervene. After all, this was Team 7's mission, meant to train Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura. If he stepped in, it would defeat the purpose of their training. However, when the two enemy ninja were about to kill Sakura and Kakashi still hadn't appeared from the forest, Yoru had no choice but to act. Yoru suspected Kakashi had intentionally delayed his intervention to gauge Yoru's combat abilities. Chapter 39 Naruto's action filled Kakashi with relief. Walking over, Kakashi said, "If you don't stop the bleeding soon, you might die, you know." Naruto, who had been resolute just moments before, panicked at the mention of death. "Ah. I don't want to die." Kakashi sighed and was about to bandage his wound. However, as he picked up Naruto's hand, he noticed that the wound was already beginning to heal. Kakashi was taken aback. Is this the power of the Nine Tails? Its regenerative abilities are truly remarkable. While Kakashi dressed his wound, Naruto kept asking, "Kakashi-sensei, am I really going to die?" Kakashi shook his head. "You're fine." After finishing the bandage, Kakashi addressed the group. "The next part of this mission will be very dangerous. Sakura, Sasuke, do you want to return to Hidden Leaf Village or continue with the mission?" Sasuke glanced at Yoru, then, as if to challenge him, said, "Of course, I'll continue with the mission." Sakura, though reluctant, was still shaken from the earlier attack when the two ninjas had nearly killed her. But since Sasuke had made his decision, she mustered her courage and said, "Whatever Sasuke does, I'll do too." Naruto, who had walked over, also said firmly, "Next time, I won't be the same as before." Kakashi nodded. "Alright, then we'll continue the mission." The group resumed their journey. Throughout the walk, Sasuke's gaze never left Yoru. Yoru's earlier display of power was far beyond his own. Even though Sasuke's first real combat performance had been the best among the three genin of Team 7, the gap between him and Yoru was immense. This guy doesn't even have a Sharingan, yet he's so fast. He defeated two Chunin in an instant. He's my age, but I'm nowhere near his level, Sasuke thought. If this continues, how will I ever defeat that man? Thinking of Itachi Uchiha, Sasuke's determination grew even stronger. The shock Yoru had given him earlier was too overwhelming. Maybe if I can defeat Yoru, I'll be able to defeat him, Sasuke thought. To Sasuke, Yoru seemed to possess the same talent as his older brother, Itachi Uchiha. Back when Itachi wiped out the Uchiha clan, he was only 13 years old. At 13, Itachi already had the strength to annihilate the entire Uchiha clan. At 13, Itachi had reached the level of a Kage. If Yoru knew Sasuke was comparing him to Itachi in terms of talent, he certainly wouldn't agree. Yoru didn't believe he could reach Kage-level strength in just a year. After all, he hadn't even mastered a truly destructive jutsu yet. The first time he tried Chidori, it had seemed like a success, but Yoru considered it a complete failure. He hadn't been able to control it properly. Meanwhile, Sakura also kept looking at Yoru, her curiosity piqued. Back in the ninja academy, she hadn't realized Yoru was so skilled. In fact, she hadn't even been aware of Yoru's existence back then. Yoru had been so unassuming that he barely registered. Now, his displayed strength clearly showed he had completely hidden his abilities during their time at the academy. What kind of temperament does it take to suppress the urge to show off such talent at such a young age? Sakura wondered. Walking beside Yoru, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Yoru, why don't I have much of an impression of you from our time at the Ninja Academy?" Sakura asked curiously as they walked. Yoru responded calmly, "Maybe it's because I'm too ordinary." Sakura shot him a glare. "You? Ordinary? I think you might already be as strong as Kakashi-sensei now." In Sakura's eyes, Yoru and Kakashi were nearly on the same level. After all, Yoru's stunning feat of taking down two Chunin in an instant had left her deeply impressed. Yoru waved dismissively. "That just means you don't understand Kakashi-sensei's true strength. He's currently one of the strongest Jonin in the Hidden Leaf Village. Don't be fooled by his seemingly lazy demeanor." Yoru continued. "In reality, Kakashi-sensei has an impressive reputation in the ninja world. He became a Jonin at our age and achieved many great feats back then. At that time, His mentor was none other than the fourth Hokage. Sakura, who initially just wanted to learn more about Yoru, was stunned by his explanation. While she had heard some details about Kakashi from Ino, all she knew was that he was strong. But Ino never mentioned that Kakashi was one of the strongest Jonin in the village. Even Sasuke was taken aback to learn just how powerful Kakashi really was. Naruto, on the other hand, exclaimed in disbelief, "No way. Kakashi-sensei may be a Jonin, but there's no way he's that amazing." And his teacher was the fourth Hokage? The fourth Hokage was Naruto's idol. Although Naruto didn't know that the fourth Hokage was his father, he deeply admired him as the hero who sealed the Nine Tails and saved the Hidden Leaf Village. Naruto's dream of becoming Hokage, like the fourth Hokage, stemmed from hearing stories of his heroics. He wanted to be someone who could gain the acceptance of the entire village. So when Naruto learned that Kakashi had been the fourth Hokage's disciple, he was utterly shocked. Seeing Naruto's reaction, Yoru said, "This isn't classified information. Kakashi-sensei became a Jonin at just 12 years old, our current age, thanks to his battlefield achievements. He is also known in the ninja world as the Copy Ninja, with a fearsome reputation. In fact, during the Third Great Ninja War, Kakashi-sensei was already well known on the battlefield. And yes, during that time, the fourth Hokage was indeed his teacher. Additionally, Kakashi graduated from the Ninja Academy at just 5 years old and became a Chunin at 6. As Yoru shared these incredible details, Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura all stared at Kakashi in astonishment. The seemingly lazy man in front of them was actually this powerful? They could hardly believe it. Yet, they knew Yoru had no reason to lie to them. Even Izuna, their client, now looked at Kakashi with a satisfied expression, feeling like he had hit the jackpot. After all, having such a powerful ninja as his escort, while only paying for a C-rank mission, was a huge bargain. With Kakashi present, Izuna felt confident that the Jonin Kado hired wouldn't pose a threat to him. Kakashi, however, looked a bit uncomfortable. "Alright, enough about the past," he said. Yoru smiled. "Just making small talk." In truth, Yoru's words were mainly directed at Sasuke. Sasuke had always been obsessed with seeking power. For the sake of revenge, he was even willing to join Orochimaru, risking his body being taken over, all for the sake of gaining strength. Yoru wanted Sasuke to understand that by following Kakashi, he could also become incredibly strong. In Yoru's opinion, what Sasuke truly needed wasn't the curse mark but a deeper mastery of the Sharingan. Without properly developing his Sharingan, even with the curse mark, Sasuke's potential would only go as far as the Kage level. While being Kage level strong was already extraordinary for most ninja, it wouldn't be enough to face the challenges of the Fourth Great Ninja War. Yoru understood that Sasuke needed to aim higher. Chapter 40. Sasuke was indeed persuaded by Yoru's words. At that moment, he looked at Kakashi with eyes filled with a deep thirst for power. He believed that Kakashi truly had the ability to make him immensely strong. Meanwhile, Sakura was intrigued by Yoru. She couldn't help but wonder how Yoru knew so much about Kakashi. Just how close were Kakashi and Yoru? "Kakashi-sensei, did you tell Yoru all of this?" Sakura looked at Kakashi with a hint of jealousy in her tone. Kakashi's lips twitched slightly. Glancing at Yoru, who had a faint smirk on his face, Kakashi felt utterly helpless. Not entirely. Most of the information, he probably looked up himself. Kakashi explained. Sakura huffed, clearly not convinced. "Humphrey, I bet Kakashi-sensei told him. It's obvious that in your eyes, Yoru is more important than us." Naruto, realizing what was happening, pointed an accusing finger at Kakashi. "Yeah. Sakura's right. Kakashi-sensei is playing favorites. You told Yoru everything but didn't tell us." Even though Sasuke stayed silent, he also felt a little annoyed. After all, Kakashi was their teacher. Logically, they should be more important to him than Yoru. But to hear that Kakashi had shared so much information with Yoru and not with them, that didn't sit well with him. Kakashi felt a headache coming on. He was certain Yoru had done this on purpose. Even Izuna chimed in from the sidelines, fanning the flames. "Kakashi, it looks like being a teacher isn't easy, huh?" Kakashi could only try to explain, "It's because we've only spent a short time together. We haven't had the chance to really get to know each other. And besides, most of the information Yoru knows, he found out on his own. I didn't tell him." But Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura didn't believe him. Naruto yelled, "No way. Kakashi-sensei, you can't play favorites. You have to teach us too. I want to learn that technique Yoru used to take out those two ninja earlier." Sakura nodded in agreement. "Yeah. Naruto's right." Sasuke, on the other hand, stayed quiet, though he found Naruto's comment ridiculous. He could tell that Yoru hadn't used any ninjutsu earlier. Kakashi chuckled bitterly. Yorua didn't use any ninjutsu earlier. What he used was taijutsu. And I didn't even teach him that. But Naruto and Sakura were skeptical. That's impossible. If you didn't teach him, how could he be so strong? Kakashi glanced at Yorua, clearly exasperated. Yorua, however, said nothing, leaving Kakashi to fend for himself. With no other choice, Kakashi relented. Alright, when there's time, I'll train all of you together. Hearing Kakashi's promise, Naruto and Sakura were overjoyed. Even Sasuke felt a surge of anticipation. After all, Kakashi's talent rivaled, if not surpassed, that of Itachi Uchiha in his prime. After walking for a long time, they finally arrived in the Land of Waves. This small nation bordered the Land of Fire. Its population was modest, and it didn't even have its own shinobi. It was easy to imagine just how poor this country was. However, the Land of Waves had a pleasant environment. With its abundant lakes, forests, and natural resources, it seemed like an ideal place to develop tourism. Moreover, being situated by the sea made it a great candidate for developing a thriving fishing industry. Given the country's small size, tourism and fishing alone could sustain its economy. Tazuna-san, your country has a lot of potential. Yorua remarked. Tazuna froze for a moment, thinking Yorua was being sarcastic. Well, the Land of Waves does have its strengths, but weak and helpless. There's no way around it, our country is too poor. Tazuna sighed. Yorua shook his head. I'm serious. Your country may be small and sparsely populated, but it has abundant tourism resources. Combined with fishing, that should be enough to bring wealth to your nation. Currently, the ninja world was in a time of relative peace, and during peaceful times, tourism could thrive. Tazuna was taken aback. Who would came to such a poor and remote place for tourism? He didn't believe it. Yorua shook his head again. Plenty of people would, as long as you let people from other nations know about this place and do the right promotion. There are still quite a few wealthy people in the world. Tazuna thought for a moment. Although he didn't entirely believe Yorua, he had to admit there was some merit to the idea. All of this hinges on getting the bridge completed first. Without it, no matter how good the tourism resources are, no one will come. Yorua nodded in agreement. That's true. Meanwhile, Kakashi observed Yorua with satisfaction. Ninjas were part of a nation's military forces, essentially an independent organization. They generally didn't concern themselves with economic matters. Aside from mission commissions, funding for their operations typically came from the nation's treasury. Financial concerns were rarely an issue for ninjas, unless they fell out of favor with their daimyo, like the Sand Village did. Normally, ninja villages and their daimyos had a mutually beneficial relationship. The daimyo wanted a strong ninja village to protect the nation's interests, and the village needed funding to maintain its strength. However, in the Sand Village's case, their poor relationship with the daimyo led to meager and military funding, significantly weakening their overall strength. Their ninja numbers couldn't even compare to the other four great villages. Ordinary ninjas didn't need to think about economics, but higher-ups like the Hokage certainly did. After all, it took immense resources to train ninjas. Without a strong economy, a ninja village would only grow weaker over time. Many smaller ninja villages had weakened or even disappeared due to the lack of financial support from their respective nations. That Yorua could consider economic issues and even offer practical insights impressed Kakashi. However, it was clear that Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura weren't interested in such topics. Their focus remained on ninjutsu and other ninja-related matters. As they traveled, Naruto seemed tense, not out of fear but because he felt embarrassed about his poor performance earlier. He was eager to redeem himself by defeating an enemy on his own. When the group passed by a lakeside, Naruto noticed movement in a nearby thicket. Excited as though he'd found treasure, he threw several kunai toward the bushes without hesitation. The sound of the kunai cutting through the air was followed by a brief silence before it seemed like the target in the bushes had been hit. Overjoyed, Naruto ignored Kakashi's attempt to stop him and dashed into the bushes. Ha ha ha, I hit it. Naruto exclaimed proudly, ready to boast to the group about taking down an enemy. But when he reached the bushes and saw what his kunai had struck, he froze awkwardly. Several kunai were embedded in a rabbit, its body bleeding profusely. Sakura, seeing the scene, rushed over and immediately exploded with anger. She punched Naruto hard on the head. Idiot Naruto, what did you just do? For someone like Sakura, the sight of the rabbit's body mangled by kunai was simply too much. Naruto scratched his head in embarrassment. Sorry, I didn't know. I thought it was an enemy. Sasuke, Yorua, and Kakashi didn't approach, instead staying by Tazuna's side. Kakashi sighed, holding his forehead in exasperation. This kid never changes, does he? Sasuke sneered. Idiot. Yorua simply chuckled. Naruto's behavior didn't surprise him in the least. After all, If Naruto didn't act this way, he wouldn't be Naruto. Chapter 41. Just as Sakura was scolding Naruto, a large blade came flying from the distance. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The blade sliced through the air at incredible speed. Sensing the danger, Kakashi immediately shouted, "Everyone, get down." Although they didn't fully understand what was happening, everyone dropped to the ground without hesitation. The massive blade flew over their heads and embedded itself in a large tree. The next moment, a ninja wearing a hidden mist forehead protector appeared, standing atop the blade with his back to the group. Everyone stared at the sudden arrival with confusion and fear. Kakashi moved to the front, placing himself between the group and the mysterious ninja. His expression grew serious. "So, it's you. Zabuza Momoki, the rogue ninja of the hidden mist. It looks like things are about to get very troublesome." Naruto, standing behind Kakashi, drew a kunai the moment he saw Zabuza. Without waiting, he charged forward, shouting, "Finally, someone to fight. This time, I won't lose to Sasuke and Yoru." Naruto had been dissatisfied with his earlier performance and now saw Zabuza as the perfect opportunity to prove himself. However, Kakashi intercepted him, his tone firm. "Don't interfere. He's not an opponent you can handle." Naruto frowned in frustration. "Kakashi-sensei, I won't mess up like I did before." Kakashi's expression darkened. Zabuza wasn't just any ninja, he was an elite Jonin. Unlike the two Chunin from earlier, even Kakashi had to tread carefully in this fight. One misstep could cost him his life. At the same time, Zabuza, standing on the tree, narrowed his eyes when he recognized Kakashi. "So, it's the Sharingan wielder, Kakashi Hatake." Zabuza muttered. No wonder those two brothers failed. Hearing Zabuza's words, Sasuke froze in surprise. "The Sharingan? Kakashi has the Sharingan?" After the Uchiha clan's massacre, Sasuke had believed he was the only one in Hidden Leaf Village with a Sharingan. Sakura, on the other hand, was puzzled. She had never heard of the Sharingan, as Sasuke had never revealed it in front of her. "Sharingan? What's that?" she asked. Naruto was equally curious and turned to Kakashi. "Kakashi-sensei, what's a Sharingan?" Kakashi remained silent, but Sasuke answered. "The Sharingan is a special dojutsu that can see through ninjutsu, ganjutsu, and taijutsu." Zabuza glanced at Sasuke, then added, "That's right. The Sharingan can also copy an opponent's jutsu." Kakashi Hatake, back when I was still in the Hidden Mist, your information was recorded in our ninja manual. Copy Ninja Kakashi, the man who can replicate over 1,000 jutsu, a dangerous individual. Hearing Zabuza's words, Sakura and Naruto were utterly stunned. Although Yoru had mentioned Kakashi's strength before, they hadn't fully grasped what that meant. Now, Zabuza's description made them realize just how powerful Kakashi truly was. Sakura was dumbfounded. So Kakashi-sensei really is that strong? Naruto stared at Kakashi in disbelief. Kakashi-sensei can use over 1,000 jutsu? That's terrifying. Meanwhile, Sasuke's gaze remained fixed on Kakashi, his thoughts focused entirely on the Sharingan. What shocked Sasuke wasn't that Kakashi knew 1,000 types of jutsu but that Kakashi actually possessed the Sharingan. The Sharingan was a unique trait exclusive to the Uchiha clan. Since Kakashi had yet to reveal it, Sasuke was still skeptical. Kakashi stared at Zabuza with a serious expression. "It seems this is going to be a tough battle. Sasuke, Naruto, Sakura, form a protective formation and guard Mr. Tazuna." He then glanced at Yoru. "Yoru, it looks like today will be our first time fighting together." Yoru, standing quietly to the side, calmly stepped up next to Kakashi, a kunai already drawn in his hand. Although Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura were reluctant, they knew their strength couldn't match Yoru's. They could only form a protective triangle around Tazuna in the middle. Zabuza turned his gaze to Yoru. He couldn't discern anything special about the boy. "It seems you trust this kid quite a bit. Is he your student?" Kakashi didn't reply. Instead, he slowly lifted his forehead protector. Sasuke, who had been watching Kakashi's every move, stared intently as the hidden eye was revealed. When Kakashi lifted the protector, his left eye, bearing the 3 Tomoe Sharingan, came into view. Sasuke froze in shock. It's really the Sharingan. And it's already the 3 Tomoe Sharingan. Even among the Uchiha clan, only a few could awaken it. Could Kakashi be an Uchiha? Sasuke couldn't help but think that Kakashi might belong to the Uchiha clan. After all, to Sasuke's knowledge, only members of the Uchiha clan could wield the Sharingan within Hidden Leaf Village. Meanwhile, Naruto and Sakura were also stunned by Kakashi's Sharingan. It was their first time seeing such a strange eye. What kind of eye is that? Why does it give off such an overwhelming aura? Naruto and Sakura both felt the intense killing intent emanating from Kakashi. Naruto, in particular, found himself inexplicably uncomfortable just looking at the Sharingan. Kakashi ignored Zabuza's comment. Zabuza spoke again, as if talking to himself. I know your profile well from the ninja manual. Do you really think I'd fight you on a battlefield that gives you the advantage? As he spoke, a thick mist began to rise around them. The eerie sight startled Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura, who immediately drew their kunai and assumed a defensive stance. Yorua, however, remained calm. Even though the mist gradually thickened, reducing visibility significantly, Yorua could still sense Zabuza's chakra clearly. This was one of the abilities granted by the chakra within his body. Kakashi frowned. Using the hidden mist jutsu to obscure my vision, huh? As expected of Zabuza Momoki. If I'm not careful, I could very well die here. Turning to Yorua, Kakashi voiced his concern. Yorua, don't leave my side. This is the Hidden Mist Village's signature hidden mist jutsu, a silent killing technique. Stay alert for any movement around us. Yorua didn't respond, his gaze locked on Zabuza as the rogue ninja crept closer to their position. Though the mist obscured everything, Yorua could track Zabuza's movements with precision. Kakashi, misinterpreting Yorua's silence, began to worry. Unleashing his chakra, Kakashi's aura erupted outward. Boom. The immense force of his chakra blasted the surrounding mist away, revealing Yorua standing there unharmed. Seeing Yorua safe, Kakashi let out a sigh of relief. Why didn't you answer me? Yorua glanced at him and chuckled. I assumed Kakashi-sensei could sense my presence. Kakashi shook his head in exasperation. Stay focused. The opponent is an elite Jonin. Don't let your guard down for even a second. When Kakashi unleashed his chakra, Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura felt the weight of the killing intent radiating from him and Zabuza. The oppressive atmosphere froze the trio in place. This is the killing intent of a Jonin battle? In such an environment, it'd be better to just die. Sasuke muttered, his voice trembling. The killing intent from Kakashi and Zabuza had shaken the three so profoundly that it affected their mental state. Sasuke, overwhelmed by the pressure, unconsciously raised his kunai, aiming it at his own abdomen. His mind had succumbed to the combined killing intent. Even Naruto's expression was pale with fear, and he seemed to lose all will to fight for survival. Chapter 42. Just as Sasuke was about to stab himself, Yarua's gaze sharpened. He unleashed the chakra within his body. Boom. A burst of golden chakra erupted from Yorua, instantly dispersing the suffocating killing intent exuded by both Zabuza and Kakashi. The previously terrified Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura suddenly felt as if they were basking in warm sunlight in the midst of a harsh winter. The oppressive atmosphere was replaced by a comforting warmth. Sasuke, clutching his kunai, stopped mid-action. Coming to his senses, he turned to look at Yorua, who now stood calmly. This is Yorua's chakra. It's so strong. Sasuke muttered, his face filled with astonishment. Until now, Yorua had only displayed his prowess in taijutsu. But the sheer intensity of the chakra he had just released left Sasuke deeply shocked. Naruto and Sakura, who had also regained their composure, were clueless that it was Yorua who had dispelled the bone-chilling killing intent. Meanwhile, deep within Naruto's consciousness, in a dimly lit cage-like space, a massive red fox slowly opened its eyes. This chakra. It feels both familiar and foreign. Could it be that annoying guy? The fox was none other than the Nine Tails, sealed within Naruto. The moment Yorua unleashed his chakra, the Nine Tails sensed a wave of energy that felt oddly familiar but slightly different. The fox, known for its acute sensitivity to chakra, appeared pensive. If it really is that man, what could he be planning? Recalling the time when it was sealed by Hashirama Senshu, the Nine Tails' expression grew grim. Yorua's chakra bore an uncanny resemblance to that of Hashirama. Though not entirely identical, it was brimming with vitality. This type of chakra was extremely rare, seen only in Hashirama, the Sage of Six Paths, and his son Azura. The Nine Tails harbored a deep resentment toward Hashirama for sealing it. However, glancing at the seal currently restraining it, the fox shook its head, closed its eyes, and went back to sleep. Back on the battlefield, Zabuza, who had been hiding in the mist, was stunned by Yorua's outburst of chakra. In that brief moment, Zabuza felt an overwhelming pressure. It was a type of chakra he had never encountered before. What struck him the most was the sheer terror of Yorua's chakra, which had completely dispelled the killing intent he and Kakashi had both conjured up. Both of their killing intents had been forged with chakra. For Yorua's chakra to simultaneously negate that of two elite Jonin was an extraordinary feat. This kid is definitely not ordinary. Kakashi must have recognized his strength to involve him in the fight. Zabuza thought to himself. Kakashi glanced at Yorua. He understood why Yorua had unleashed his chakra. The combined killing intent from himself and Zabuza had placed an immense burden on Sasuke and the others. If not for Yorua, Sasuke might have actually stabbed himself. What Kakashi didn't anticipate was how much stronger Yorua's chakra had become. This guy really is a monster. Could it be because of that incident the other night? Kakashi speculated that Yorua's sudden growth in chakra might be linked to the events of that fateful night. However, the speed of his development had far surpassed Kakashi's expectations. Yorua, looking towards Zabuza hiding in the distant mist, said calmly, "Kakashi-sensei, you take the lead. I'll support you from the side." Kakashi turned his head to look at Yorua. "Kakashi, can you see where he is?" Yorua nodded slightly. "I can sense his chakra." Kakashi froze. Sensory ability? To sense Zabuza's chakra, this was a skill unique to sensory-type ninjas. Yorua not only had sensory abilities but could also pinpoint Zabuza's exact location. This meant that Yorua's sensory skills were exceptionally powerful. Zabuza, however, was unaware that Yorua had already located him. With no further worries, Kakashi prepared to engage in the battle without restraint. "He is on the surface of the lake," Yorua said calmly. Kakashi focused his chakra and used his Sharingan to look toward the lake. In an instant, he spotted Zabuza standing on the water's surface. Unbeknownst to Kakashi, Zabuza had also created a water clone. As Kakashi prepared to attack Zabuza on the lake, Zabuza suddenly appeared in front of Tazuna. Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura were caught off guard, unable to react in time. As Zabuza swung his executioner's blade toward Tazuna, the three tried to intervene but found themselves unable to move. The oppressive killing intent of the Jonin completely paralyzed them. Bang! Slash! In a flash, Zabuza's attack was halted. Tazuna was pushed away by a mysterious force, and Zabuza's hand, holding the massive blade, froze midair. When everyone looked again, they saw Yorua standing in front of Zabuza. In Yorua's hand, a kunai had already pierced Zabuza's chest. But Yorua's face showed no joy at the apparent victory. His expression remained calm and composed. Moments later, water began dripping from Zabuza's chest, no blood, just water. Yorua glanced at Zabuza without any surprise. It was merely a water clone. The next second, Zabuza's water clone dissolved into a puddle. Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura, who had collapsed to the ground, stared blankly at the scene before them. From the lake, Kakashi observed Yorua's actions, a faint smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Nicely done, Yorua." Although the attacker was just a water clone, if left unchecked, Sasuke and the others wouldn't have stood a chance against it. Without intervention, the water clone might have truly killed Tazuna. Tazuna, lying on the ground, let out a sigh of relief. When Zabuza swung his blade earlier, he thought his life was over. Looking at Yorua, who calmly put away his kunai, Sasuke's expression turned grim. "How can the gap between us be this wide? If I can't even surpass Yorua, how can I ever kill that bastard? I have to get stronger. Much stronger." Naruto, meanwhile, was completely stunned. He couldn't believe the vast difference in skill between him and Yorua. Back in the academy, Yorua had barely stood out. They had all just graduated recently. So how had the gap widened so drastically? Naruto couldn't accept it. They were the same age, and they had both just graduated from the ninja academy. Why was Yorua so much stronger than him? On the other hand, Sakura felt an overwhelming sense of security. On the lake, Zabuza, witnessing how Yorua had effortlessly defeated his water clone, was visibly shocked. How is that kid so strong? He's supposed to be just a genin, right? The combat experience and speed he just displayed are already at a Jonin level. Who exactly is he? A prodigy trained by the Leaf Village? Zabuza was shaken by Yorua's strength. He had initially expected to face Kakashi and three mere genin. Now, he was up against Kakashi, an elite Jonin, and Yorua, a ninja with strength that undoubtedly matched a Jonin. It was essentially a 2-against-1 situation. Chapter 43. After taking care of Zabuza's water clone, Yorua called out to Kakashi, "Kakashi-sensei, focus on dealing with his real body. Don't worry about this side." Kakashi's lips curved into a faint smile. Bringing you along was definitely the right decision. The strength Yorua had displayed so far filled Kakashi with satisfaction. From instantly defeating two Chunin earlier to now taking down Zabuza's water clone, Yorua hadn't even used any ninjutsu. Yet his strength already matched that of a Jonin. Kakashi could clearly sense that Yorua's taijutsu skills were far superior to what they had been the night he tested him. If Yorua's taijutsu had been at this level that night, it wouldn't have been so easy for Kakashi to defeat him. And this was considering that Yorua had never formally learned taijutsu. From start to finish, Yorua had fought purely on instinct, without any formal taijutsu training. It was clear that if he were to receive proper taijutsu training, his potential would be astounding. Zabuza regarded Yorua with a serious expression. This troublesome brat. He's really difficult to deal with. Zabuza realized that if he didn't eliminate Yorua, it would be impossible to kill Tazuna. Facing Kakashi one-on-one didn't trouble him too much. Despite Kakashi's formidable reputation, Zabuza himself was an elite Jonin and one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. He believed there wasn't much of a gap between him and Kakashi. But with Yorua added into the mix, assassinating Tazuna had become much harder. After all, the mission wasn't about comparing strength with Kakashi but about eliminating Tazuna. As Kakashi launched another attack at Zabuza, Zabuza's face darkened, and he swung his executioner's blade. Clang! 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 The sound of metal clashing echoed across the lake. One wielded a massive blade, the other a kunai. Sparks flew as the 2 elite Jonin engaged in a pure taijutsu battle. Their speed and power left Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura, witnessing a Jonin-level battle for the first time, utterly stunned. For the first time, Sasuke felt his own insignificance. So this is what a Jonin is capable of? Yorua wasn't wrong. Kakashi really is strong. Naruto clenched his fists tightly. Damn it, why am I so weak? I can't do anything to help. Meanwhile, Sakura stood guard by Tazuna with a serious expression. She knew she was the weakest among them. If even Sasuke and Naruto couldn't participate in the fight against Zabuza and Kakashi, then she definitely couldn't either. However, when she looked at Yorua, she was filled with awe. Yorua had left an enormous impression on her. From saving her by instantly defeating 2 Chunin earlier to now destroying a Jonin's water clone and protecting all 4 of them, his strength far surpassed theirs. Back in the Ninja Academy, he had barely been noticeable. Yorua, however, was entirely focused on the battle between Zabuza and Kakashi. This fight was providing him with immense insights. After all, this was a clash between 2 elite Jonin, even if it was purely a taijutsu battle. Watching them fight gave Yorua plenty of inspiration. He even managed to pick up some taijutsu techniques just by observing. Previously, he didn't know any formal taijutsu and relied solely on his physical abilities in combat. Zabuza, noticing Kakashi's increasingly aggressive attacks, realized that if this continued, regardless of the outcome, he wouldn't be able to eliminate Tazuna. Tazuna. With a powerful swing of his executioner's blade, Zabuza sent Kakashi flying. He then leapt backward, his hands moving at lightning speed to form hand seals. In the blink of an eye, a jutsu was complete. Water style, water dragon jutsu. Roar. A dragon's roar echoed from the lake. Columns of water shot up from the lake's surface, instantly coalescing into a massive water dragon over 10 meters long. The water dragon howled as it surged toward Yorua with incredible speed. Kakashi, still recovering from being thrown back, was shocked. Not good. Yorua doesn't know ninjutsu yet. But the water dragon was too fast. In an instant, it was upon Yorua and the others. After releasing his jutsu, Zabuza smirked. No matter how strong your taijutsu is, blocking this jutsu will be nearly impossible. Ha ha ha. Roar. The water dragon roared, ferocious and unstoppable, speeding closer. It seemed inevitable that it would engulf Yorua and the others. Kakashi wanted to intervene, but there was no time. Yorua, staring at the water dragon rushing toward him, frowned slightly. That's quite a powerful jutsu. In the next moment, his hands began moving rapidly. Water style, water dragon jutsu. Roar. Just as Zabuza's water dragon was about to strike, Yorua's hands finished forming seals in an instant. Droplets of water began gathering around Yorua. The water droplets spun rapidly in the air, forming into a massive water dragon, tens of meters larger than Zabuza's. This enormous water dragon surged upward from above Yorua's head like a colossal sea creature emerging from the ocean. It roared ferociously and charged at Zabuza's water dragon. Boom. The 2 water dragons collided with immense force, causing the ground within dozens of meters to crack like a spiderweb. In an instant, the massive water dragon created by Yorua shattered Zabuza's dragon into a spray of water. Yorua's dragon remained intact, surging forward with lifelike ferocity, heading straight for Zabuza. In the blink of an eye, the massive dragon's head, several meters wide, opened its jaws to devour Zabuza. Zabuza was stunned. Impossible. How does he know this jutsu? At his age, he couldn't possibly have that much chakra. And his water dragon jutsu. It's formed from nothing, without using the lake's water. Where does this brat get such a terrifying amount of chakra? And why is his water dragon jutsu so much stronger than mine? Is this guy even human? Countless thoughts raced through Zabuza's mind in that brief moment. Seeing the massive water dragon lunging at him with its jaws wide open, Zabuza had no choice but to use the body flicker jutsu to escape. Boom. The gigantic water dragon missed Zabuza and plunged into the lake where he had been standing. Roar. The impact sent waves several meters high rippling across the lake. Even someone as seasoned as Zabuza, a product of the Bloody Mist, felt a chill in his heart. What a terrifying water dragon jutsu. Its power far surpasses mine. This kid is a monster. If that had hit me, I'd probably be blown into pieces. Meanwhile, Kakashi, who had reached Sasuke and Naruto's side, was staring at Yorua in disbelief. He muttered, that water dragon jutsu. Could he have learned it just by watching Zabuza? The thought sent a shiver down Kakashi's spine. Such a learning ability was beyond terrifying. Even more astonishing, after learning it, Yorua's version of the jutsu was far more powerful than Zabuza's. Kakashi doubted whether even he could execute the water dragon jutsu of the same caliber. Chapter 44 The water dragon released by Yorua plunged into the lake, and for several seconds, its immense body stretched to over 100 meters in length. A terrifying dragon's roar echoed across several hundred meters, as if a real dragon had appeared in the area. The once calm lake was now in complete turmoil, waves several meters high surging and spreading out for hundreds of meters. The water overflowed onto the lake shore, flooding the surrounding area, even causing tremors across the ground within several hundred meters. The sheer power of this jutsu was evident. After executing the technique, Yorua felt that only about 1/10 of his chakra had been consumed. As he lowered his hands, he murmured, no wonder it's a B-rank jutsu. The chakra consumption is enormous. Neither Kakashi nor Zabuza heard his words. If they had, they would have coughed up blood in frustration. The water dragon jutsu that Yorua had just performed didn't draw upon the water from the lake at all, it was entirely created out of thin air using chakra. The terrifying amount of water alone would have completely drained the chakra of a typical Jonin. When the second Hokage and third Hokage fought on a rooftop, creating a simple water formation wall with chakra alone was enough to leave the Anbu Jonin watching in awe. But Yorua's water dragon jutsu, in terms of difficulty, scale, and power, surpassed even the second Hokage's technique. And like the second Hokage, it was entirely formed using chakra. The second Hokage had no water sources in his environment, which was why he relied on pure chakra. But in Yorua's case, there was a lake right in front of him. The only reason he relied solely on chakra was that it was his first time performing the jutsu, and he lacked experience. Even so, the power of his water dragon jutsu far exceeded that of Zabuza's. If not for the fact that Yorua's chakra was primarily composed of natural energy, requiring far less volume than standard chakra, the consumption would have been much greater than just 1/10 of his reserves. Yet, despite this, Yorua still found the jutsu to be highly chakra-intensive. Comparisons like this were bound to make others feel frustrated to death. As Yorua murmured to himself, Sakura, standing nearby, was completely dumbfounded. Yorua, your jutsu is so much stronger than Zabuza's, she exclaimed. When Yorua released his jutsu, both Sakura and Tazuna were surrounded by a layer of water walls, parts of the water dragon's body. She had witnessed the entire process of Yorua casting the jutsu. The fact that a water dragon jutsu performed by an elite jonin like Zabuza couldn't compare to Yorua's left Sakura at a loss for words. If earlier she thought Yorua's strength lay solely in taijutsu, now she realized that his taijutsu, ninjutsu, and chakra reserves all vastly outclassed theirs. Even though Sakura didn't know much about the water dragon jutsu, the sheer oppressive power of Yorua's technique was proof enough of the massive chakra expenditure involved. After all, that was a water dragon over 100 meters long. What's more, Yorua's water dragon seemed almost alive, completely different from Zabuza's. Yorua was becoming more and more of an enigma to her. How could someone so powerful have gone unnoticed during their time at the Ninja Academy? It wasn't just that he was inconspicuous. Sakura realized that before graduating, she hadn't even been aware there was a classmate named Yorua. Yorua shook his head. It's just because I used this jutsu for the first time and didn't quite master it. Sakura was stunned. That answer left her dumbfounded. This was your first time using this jutsu? Yorua nodded. How is that possible? Your hand seal speed was so fast and so precise, how could this be your first time? Yorua didn't respond further. He felt no need to explain, as Sakura wouldn't understand at her current level. Seeing Yorua remain silent, Sakura grew even more shocked. Because she realized Yorua had no reason to lie to her. Given Yorua's personality, he wasn't the type to make things up. Back at the Ninja Academy, he had always been so low-key, there was no way he would suddenly act flashy now. But precisely because of this, Sakura was even more amazed. The first time he used it, and the power was already so immense. And Yorua had said he hadn't even mastered it yet. If this was his level without full mastery, what would it look like once he had perfected it? Would he be able to use it without even forming hand seals? The more she thought about it, the more terrifying the possibilities became. They were the same age, yet she couldn't even see Yorua's shadow anymore. The gap between them was this massive. Kakashi walked up to Yorua and remarked, "Your control has improved a lot. At least the power wasn't as overwhelming or uncontrollable this time. It seems you've made rapid progress." Yorua nodded. "It's probably because this jutsu isn't that difficult and doesn't require such high control." Yorua knew what Kakashi was implying. Although the water-style, water dragon jutsu Yorua had just released was incredibly powerful, surprising Kakashi, it wasn't nearly as shocking as the time Yorua had used Chidori. That night, if Yorua had unleashed the same Chidori here, no one but Yorua would have survived. It had been a force that swallowed everything within hundreds of meters in an instant. That night, if Kakashi hadn't reacted quickly and escaped, he wouldn't have escaped unscathed either. The water dragon jutsu Yorua had just released, while still very powerful, was completely under control. It now had significant practical combat value. But for Yorua to claim that the water-style, water dragon jutsu was not that difficult. This was a B-rank jutsu, typically only learned by Jonin level ninja. Most Chunin could only use it once, as it would drain them of all their chakra. In combat, even Jonin could only afford to use it a few times, relying on favorable terrain to conserve chakra. After all, maintaining sufficient chakra reserves was critical to continue fighting. The water dragon jutsu consumed a tremendous amount of chakra. But Yorua's water dragon jutsu wasn't just powerful, it was also created entirely using his own chakra, without relying on natural water sources. Such a technique, even for Kakashi, could only be used 2 or 3 times. Kakashi had a significant amount of chakra, but his Sharingan constantly drained it. Without the burden of the Sharingan, Kakashi's chakra reserves would be on par with Kage level ninja, as was revealed during the 4th Great Ninja War. Freed from the Sharingan, Kakashi had no trouble performing large-scale jutsu. Moreover, the water dragon jutsu was anything but simple. A B-rank jutsu posed considerable difficulty, even for Chunin level ninja. Yet Yorua had learned it on the spot and executed it proficiently on his first attempt. But then again, Yorua had also learned the A-rank jutsu Chidori on his first try. If not for his chakra rampaging that night, he would have completely mastered it. Kakashi looked at Yorua and smiled. "That must have consumed a lot of chakra, right?" Yorua nodded earnestly. "It did. It took about 1/10 of my chakra." Kakashi was momentarily stunned. "Only 1/10?" Yorua looked puzzled. "Isn't 1/10 a lot?" That answer left Kakashi speechless. With a twitch of his mouth, he said, "I thought it would have used up at least 1/3 of your chakra. If that were the case, it'd be too terrifying." Even Yorua couldn't quite understand. He felt that losing 1/10 of his chakra was already significant, yet Kakashi had thought it would take 1/3. After all, it was just a B-rank jutsu. If an A-rank or S-rank jutsu consumed that much chakra, he might have understood. Chapter 45 Kakashi looked at Yorua's puzzled expression and felt a bit speechless. But when he remembered that Yorua's chakra was sage chakra, he understood. Sage chakra was indeed of a higher quality than regular chakra, so it made sense that the same jutsu would consume less of it. "The water dragon jutsu, did you just learn it on the spot?" Kakashi asked. Yorua nodded. "I saw him forming hand seals and could sense the flow of his chakra. Considering the jutsu wasn't particularly difficult, I gave it a try, and I didn't expect it to actually work." Hearing Yorua's explanation, Kakashi was momentarily at a loss for words. This jutsu isn't exactly easy. A B-rank jutsu like this is something only Jonin can typically master. Although Kakashi said this, Yorua didn't pay much attention to it. He didn't think replicating the water dragon jutsu on the spot was particularly challenging. Or rather, the water dragon jutsu simply didn't pose much difficulty for him. He could clearly sense the flow of chakra within Zabuza's body. In a sense, Yorua wasn't too different from someone with a Sharingan or Byakugan. From a distance, Zabuza's gaze toward Yorua was unusually serious. This kid is really troublesome. If he teams up with Kakashi, completing this mission will be tough. If Zabuza wanted to kill Tazuna, he first had to deal with Yorua. Even if he could defeat Yorua, Kakashi wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Realizing this, Zabuza decisively gave up on the assassination attempt. "Kid, next time we meet, I will kill you." Before leaving, Zabuza threw out a harsh threat at Yorua. With that, he disappeared across the surface of the lake. Yorua stared at the lake's rippling surface and murmured, "The next time we meet, perhaps it won't be you killing me." Yorua disliked being threatened the most. And from this battle, he had already gauged Zabuza's general strength. Zabuza indeed had the power of an elite Jonin. If Yorua fought him one-on-one, he might be the one to lose his life. But with Kakashi there, in a 2-on-1 scenario, Yorua was confident that Zabuza would be the one to die. After Zabuza left, Kakashi let out a sigh of relief. After all, among the students he was leading, Aside from Sakura, the rest were people Hidden Leaf Village absolutely could not afford to lose. Naruto's status went without saying. He was the son of the 4th Hokage and the Jinchuriki of the Ninetales. Sasuke was the last surviving member of the Uchiha clan. The 3rd Hokage had high hopes for him, wanting him to grow, fully develop the Sharingan, and eventually be able to help control the Nine Tails within Naruto. And Yoruba was the one Kakashi valued the most, treating him as his personal disciple. However, if Zabuza hadn't retreated, he probably wouldn't have succeeded in killing Tazuna anyway. Even if Yoruba's strength wasn't yet on par with Zabuza's, with him and Kakashi teaming up, Zabuza wouldn't have stood a chance. At that moment, Sasuke and Naruto approached. The way they looked at Yoruba was completely different from before. In this battle, Yoruba had demonstrated strength far beyond theirs. They weren't even on the same level. Kakashi-sensei, have you secretly taught Yoruba a lot of jutsu? He's way stronger than us now. Naruto pouted. Naruto felt that Yoruba's strength must have come from Kakashi secretly tutoring him. Sasuke, however, didn't think the same. He could tell that Yoruba's fighting style was entirely different from Kakashi's. Moreover, the water dragon jutsu Yoruba had just used, he doubted even Kakashi could execute it. As someone from the Uchiha clan, Sasuke was well aware that the jutsu Yoruba had unleashed far surpassed the standard power of the water dragon jutsu. Yoruba, like him and Naruto, clearly had something unique about him. Kakashi, seeing Naruto's dissatisfied expression, explained, I didn't teach him that jutsu. Naruto didn't believe it. That's impossible. That jutsu just now had such a complicated set of hand seals. Are you saying Yoruba developed it himself? Kakashi patted Naruto's shoulder and looked at him seriously. What if he copied it from Zabuza? Kakashi-sensei, do you think I'm an idiot? How could that be possible? If watching once was enough to learn a jutsu, I'd know tons by now. Naruto truly hadn't learned much at the Ninja Academy. If not for the 3rd Hokage looking out for him, given his performance at the academy, he would have been expelled long ago. His grades were often zeros across the board, and even by graduation, he hadn't mastered the clone jutsu. That was the most basic of ninja techniques, something every academy student was expected to learn. Students admitted to the academy were usually very talented. After all, Hidden Leaf Village had only one ninja academy, and each year it admitted only a few dozen students. From the 4th Great Ninja War, it was clear Hidden Leaf Village had over 10,000 ninjas. Obviously, not all of them could have come from the academy. Most ninjas in the ninja world didn't graduate from a formal academy but were selected through other means. It was similar to the Chunin exams. Not all Chunin needed to take the exams to be promoted. In most cases, promotion to Chunin was based on the village's judgment of their abilities. Those participating in the Chunin exams were usually the elites of their respective villages. The Chunin exams weren't just an ordinary test, it was a stage for villages to showcase their most outstanding young talent. Likewise, the Ninja Academy wasn't for just anyone. Ordinary people couldn't even qualify to enroll. But Naruto not only got into the academy with poor performance, but he also stayed there, showing just how much the 3rd Hokage had supported him. Of course, Naruto wasn't aware of any of this. At the academy, he really hadn't learned much. Forget jutsu, he didn't even grasp the most basic theoretical knowledge. On the other hand, Sakura was the true genius at the academy. In terms of theoretical knowledge, even Sasuke couldn't compare to her. During the Chunin exams, many of the questions were beyond both Sasuke and Naruto, they had no idea how to answer them. But Sakura managed to answer them all. That exam was designed to test a ninja's ability to gather intelligence. Relying on her solid foundation in theory, Sakura had passed with ease. So for Naruto, the idea that someone could master a jutsu just by watching it once was utterly ridiculous. It sounded like pure fantasy. But Sasuke knew better. He had even witnessed it before. That person was his brother, the man he had always wanted to kill, Itachi Uchiha. Back then, Itachi had been able to replicate a jutsu after seeing their father perform it only once. Meanwhile, Sasuke would need to train for a long time just to pull it off. Looking at Yoruba now, Sasuke was reminded of Itachi. Does Yoruba have the same level of talent as that man? No. Perhaps Yoruba's talent is even greater. After all, Yoruba learned a B-rank jutsu in the midst of battle and unleashed it with more power than the original user. If I can defeat Yoruba, then I can definitely defeat that man. Sasuke clenched his fist. He had initially felt a tinge of jealousy toward Yoruba. But now, he saw Yoruba as the goal he must surpass. Chapter 46 Kakashi, seeing that Naruto completely refused to believe him, decided not to explain further. After all, Yoruba's situation was indeed special. Turning to Tazuna, Kakashi asked, Mr. Tazuna, how many Jonin has Gato hired? Besides Zabuza, that is. Tazuna thought for a moment before replying, I'm not too sure about that. I only heard that Gato hired a Jonin, but I didn't even know which one he hired until now. Kakashi fell silent for a moment, contemplating whether to continue the mission. Just dealing with Zabuza was already troublesome. If another Jonin showed up, it would be even more difficult. Kakashi looked at Yorua, as if seeking his opinion. Yorua nodded and said, "At this point, we can only continue. For the time being, I'll train harder. At the very least, I should be able to hold off one Jonin. With your strength, Kakashi-sensei, if I can handle one of them, you should be able to defeat Zabuza. And if Zabuza is the only Jonin, then with the two of us working together, he won't stand a chance." Kakashi considered it and said, "Alright, in that case, let's proceed with the mission. During the time we're protecting Mr. Tazuna, I'll make sure to teach you some more jutsu. You already have Jonin level strength, and your combat experience is solid. Adding a few more powerful jutsu to your arsenal will make you a true Jonin." Kakashi's praise for Yorua's abilities wasn't exaggerated in the slightest. "I'll do my best." Yorua agreed with Kakashi's suggestion. Naruto leaned in and said, "Kakashi-sensei, don't forget about us. We're your students too." Looking at Naruto, Kakashi replied, "Of course I know that. But you're not ready to learn jutsu yet. You need to build a solid foundation first." Naruto looked puzzled. "What foundation? Kakashi-sensei, are you just making excuses because you don't want to teach us?" Naruto suspected Kakashi was trying to avoid teaching them and was making up excuses. Kakashi sighed in exasperation. "You need to master the basics first. You haven't even learned proper chakra control yet, let alone advanced jutsu. Yorua has already mastered excellent chakra control, so he doesn't need to spend time on that anymore." Naruto still felt that Kakashi was being unfair. Sasuke, on the other hand, seemed deep in thought. Unlike Naruto, he agreed with Kakashi's perspective. Meanwhile, Sakura looked at Yorua with admiration. Despite being so strong, Yorua remained calm and composed. Naruto, on the other hand, turned away with a pout, his frustration evident. Kakashi could only shake his head in helplessness. He really wasn't playing favorites. Though he did value Yorua more highly, Naruto was still the son of the fourth Hokage and someone the third Hokage had entrusted to him for special training. From every angle, Kakashi wasn't being biased. It was just that Naruto's foundation was practically non-existent. What could Kakashi even teach him? Even if he tried, Naruto probably wouldn't be able to learn it. After all, Naruto had struggled even with the basic clone jutsu. If not for the way the shadow clone jutsu perfectly suited his unique chakra reserves, he might not have mastered it at all. Back then, the third Hokage had gone to great lengths to ensure Naruto learned the shadow clone jutsu. Even something as vital as the Scroll of Seals had been conveniently made accessible to him. It had taken a large-scale effort. The ninjas sent out to find Naruto couldn't locate him, which showed how much effort the third Hokage had put into the matter. Those ninjas were probably too scared to capture Naruto themselves, worrying they might be punished if they did. Kakashi felt helpless but knew explaining would be futile since Naruto wouldn't believe him anyway. So, he simply dropped the subject. The group continued their journey and eventually arrived at Tazuna's house. In Tazuna's home lived 3 people, his daughter Tsunami and his grandson Inari. When Inari saw Kakashi, Yorua, and the others, his eyes were filled with doubt. During dinner, Tazuna and Tsunami recounted the events of their journey to Inari. Initially skeptical of Kakashi and the group, Inari's eyes began to light up as he listened to the stories, especially regarding Kakashi and Yorua. "Can you really defeat Gato's ninjas?" Inari couldn't help but ask Kakashi. Scratching his head, Kakashi replied, "We should be able to." However, Inari, noticing Kakashi's lack of confidence, quickly lost the hope that had started to form. "So, it's impossible, huh? Those ninjas are so powerful. How could you beat them?" Hearing this, Naruto couldn't hold back. "Don't be so pessimistic. I'm a ninja who's going to become Hokage. No matter how strong Zabuza is, I'll definitely beat him." But Inari showed no interest in Naruto's passionate declaration. Instead, he sneered, "Your teacher doesn't even look confident, so how could you possibly do it?" Clenching his fists, Naruto said seriously, "It's just Zabuza. I can beat him too." Sakura and Sasuke, sitting nearby, glanced at the fired-up Naruto, feeling a bit speechless. In their earlier battle, Naruto certainly hadn't shown this level of heroism. Inari, still unconvinced, sneered, "Gato is far stronger than you think. Anyone who goes against him will die." His voice rose with emotion, as if recalling a painful memory. Naruto was stunned by Inari's outburst. He couldn't understand why someone they were trying to help would act so hostile toward them. After yelling, Inari stormed out of the house. Tazuna sighed heavily. Kakashi asked, "That child must have gone through something painful, and it's probably related to Gato, right?" Tazuna nodded and explained, his father was killed by Gato for resisting him. Ever since he saw his father murdered before his eyes, Inari has stopped believing anyone can defeat Gato. He thinks people who try to act like heroes are just foolish. Actually, Inari was always proud of his father. But that event hit him too hard. After hearing Tazuna's explanation, Naruto, who had wanted to argue with Inari earlier, fell silent. Sitting beside Tazuna, Tsunami sighed. That child still wishes someone would stand up and defeat Gato. But after so many years, no one has managed to do it. It's not just Inari. Everyone in the Land of Waves hopes someone will take down Gato. Naruto looked at Tazuna with determination and said, I'll definitely defeat Gato and change Inari's mind. But after Naruto's declaration, Tazuna didn't look at him. Instead, he turned to Kakashi and Yorua. Kakashi, Yorua, do you two really think you can defeat Zabuza? Naruto was furious. But he knew, based on their earlier battle, that Kakashi and Yorua had indeed displayed incredible strength. He, on the other hand, hadn't performed very well. Yorua stayed silent, feeling it wasn't his place to speak. After some thought, Kakashi said, if it's just Zabuza, I'm confident I can defeat him on my own. And with Yorua here, if it's truly just Zabuza, he doesn't stand a chance against us. But if Gato hires another Jonin, the outcome will be uncertain. Hearing Kakashi's response, Tazuna looked worried. Hiring Kakashi and Yorua had already been a stroke of luck, especially for the cost of a C-rank mission. He couldn't bring himself to ask for more. Chapter 47. After chatting with Tazuna for a while, Kakashi gathered Yorua, Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura for a meeting. In the room, Kakashi sat in front of the four and said, I need to make some arrangements for this escort mission. While we're protecting Mr. Tazuna, we also need to focus on training. So, I'm planning to split you into two groups. The groups will take turns, one will protect Mr. Tazuna while the other trains with me. Hearing Kakashi's plan, Naruto immediately raised his hand. Kakashi-sensei, I want to be in the same group as Sakura. Sakura's mouth twitched as she replied with disdain, I don't want that. Her straightforward rejection left Naruto heartbroken. Sakura, let's be in the same group. Naruto pleaded. Although Sakura had always made it clear that she disliked Naruto and liked Sasuke, Naruto refused to give up. To Naruto, Sakura was his goddess. His persistence even bordered on being overly clingy. But the more Naruto acted like this, the less Sakura liked him. She rolled her eyes and said again, I don't want to. Quickly, Sakura added, I want to be in the same group as Sasuke. Sasuke, however, showed no reaction. He didn't care which group he was in. Yorua shared the same indifference. Kakashi looked at Naruto and Sakura, clearly troubled by their bickering. Alright, Sasuke and Naruto will be in one group, while Yorua and Sakura will be in the other. It's decided. Kakashi said. Hearing this, Naruto jumped up in anger. Why? I don't want to be in the same group as Sasuke. His face was filled with frustration. Sasuke was the person he disliked the most. Sakura also froze for a moment. She didn't have a problem with Yorua, but she still wanted to be in Sasuke's group. However, seeing Yorua's calm demeanor, she decided not to argue further. Sasuke, noticing Naruto's disdainful expression as he pointed at him, also felt annoyed. You think I want to be grouped with a loser like you? Sasuke retorted. Naruto clenched his fists and glared at Sasuke. You jerk. Sasuke, this isn't the academy anymore. Do you still think you're stronger than me? Although Sasuke wanted to fire back, he thought about Naruto's personality and chose to stay quiet. It wasn't that he was afraid of Naruto, he just didn't want to waste energy arguing with him. Seeing Sasuke fall silent, Naruto turned his frustration toward Kakashi. Kakashi-sensei, you're being unfair. Why did you group Yorua with Sakura? Sakura isn't even part of Yorua's team. Yorua remained calm, completely unfazed by the grouping. In fact, he would have preferred to work alone. Kakashi glanced at Naruto and explained, the reason for the grouping is that Yorua's strength is enough to protect Sakura, while you and Sasuke, although not very strong individually, can still protect yourselves if you work together. Naruto was momentarily stunned. He looked at Sasuke and muttered, I'm not teaming up with Sasuke. But deep down, he was pleased, Kakashi had acknowledged his strength. Sasuke nodded, showing he agreed with the grouping as well. Sakura, however, sighed in exasperation. Kakashi-sensei, are you saying I'm the weakest? Although it was true, during the earlier battle with Zabuza, Naruto hadn't performed well, but even that was better than Sakura's contribution. This was a fact she couldn't deny. Sakura was well aware. When it came to combat, she was the weakest in the team. In fact, Sakura at this point had little to no fighting ability. She only knew the 3 basic jutsu and some rudimentary applications of ninjutsu. Her combat power was far inferior even to Naruto's. Kakashi didn't respond to Sakura's comment, which was as good as an admission. After dividing into groups, the team members went to rest. On the other side, after escaping, Zabuza returned to his hideout in the forest. Inside the room, Zabuza set down his executioner's blade and sat in thought. After a long while, the door opened. A beautiful person walked in from outside. Seeing this person, Zabuza said, "Next time, you'll have to make a move. You saw the entire battle, didn't you?" The person nodded calmly. This was none other than Zabuza's assistant, Hueco. With an appearance so beautiful, one might mistake Hueco for a stunning woman. But in reality, Hueco was a boy. He was a ninja from the Yuki clan of the Hidden Mist village, possessing the Kekkei Genkai of ice style. Hueco's strength was undoubtedly on the level of a Jonin. If not for his personality, he might even rank among the strongest Jonin. Hueco walked in and stood beside Zabuza. "I saw it. That person's strength is formidable, definitely not inferior to mine." Zabuza's expression was serious. "Yes, his strength is on par with yours. To complete this mission, we must keep that kid occupied. If we can hold him off, I'm confident I can kill Kakashi and finish the job." Recalling Yorua's performance in the previous battle, Hueco said, "He seems to be experiencing his first real combat. Although his displayed strength is impressive, he's clearly lacking experience." Zabuza nodded. "That kid must be Kakashi's student, likely a genin who just graduated from the Ninja Academy. If that kid is allowed to live, the Leaf Village will gain a powerful ninja. But that's not our concern. To complete this mission, that kid must die." Hueco fell silent. He didn't want to kill, especially someone like Yorua.